Hey there, tonight we're diving into the daily shuffle of Roman women, where surviving domestic life often meant navigating everything from toga tantrums to grape-stomping gossip. What you're about to discover is that their secret weapon might just have been their humor. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. So you're waking up in ancient Rome, not the toga-wearing, forum-strolling fantasy they sell in Hollywood, but the gritty, grape-stomped streets where the humdrum of daily life is as real as the price of bread. You're a Roman woman, and while Caesar might be off conquering Gaul, you're conquering something far more daunting, domestic life. Your day kicks off at the crack of dawn, not because you're an early bird, but because the household isn't going to run itself. Roosters crow, but they're just the soundtrack to your reality. A reality where your first task is to get that fire going. Yes, the literal fire, because central heating is still a couple of millennia away. Wood or charcoal doesn't come cheap, and depending on your economic standing, you might find yourself bartering in the morning market. A sestrius here, a denarius there. Every piece counts when the average Roman family pulls in roughly 1,200 sestertii a year. Once the hearth is ablaze, it's time to whip up breakfast. Forget about leisurely brunches. A typical morning meal is a no-frills affair. Bread and maybe some cheese if Fortuna is smiling upon you. Oh, and don't even start with the coffee, because that little bean of joy is still lounging in Ethiopia, centuries away from becoming your morning fix. Instead, you might sip on some diluted wine. After all, little vino with a water chaser is the breakfast of champions, or at least the Roman version of Gatorade. Now, onto the chores, because a Roman household doesn't maintain its grandeur on wishes and Roman guards. Cleaning is a constant battle against the dust and grime that the city's bustling streets generously offer. The floors are swept, and if you're lucky enough to have a mosaic or two, those pebbles aren't going to scrub themselves. Water fetching is another delightful task. You, or your trusty slave if you're of the upper echelons, will trek to the nearest aqueduct or public fountain. Rome might boast its famed aqueducts, but unless you're in a palace, that water isn't flowing right into your sink. Let's talk about expectations. Roman men, bless their ambitious souls, are off making history, which leaves you with the more mundane task of keeping the household running like a well-oiled chariot. You're expected to manage the slaves, budget the finances, and maybe even oversee the education of your children. And you thought multitasking was a modern invention. The economic reality bites harder than a Roman wolf. A loaf of bread might cost you around 2 asses, or perhaps a denarius, for a week's worth of grain if you're buying in bulk. Olive oil, that liquid gold, is another staple, setting you back another 25 sestertii per amphora. You can forget about those elaborate feasts, unless you're part of the senatorial class. For most, dinner is a simple pulse, a porridge of grains that makes oatmeal look like a Michelin-starred dish. Your wardrobe is another matter entirely. That tunic you're wearing, it's not just a fashion statement, it's a financial one. A basic tunic costs about 15 sestertii, and if you're in the market for a palla, that's another 50 sestertii down the drain. You can't just walk into a Roman Walmart after all. Each piece is hand-woven, the product of countless hours of labor. If you're particularly daring, you might try to slip in some time for the baths. The thermi are the social hubs where you can catch up on the latest gossip while scrubbing off the grime. Entry fees vary, but they're generally affordable. A few quadrantes for a soak, a small price for a little slice of luxury. Life isn't all chores and economic juggling, though there are festivals to look forward to, and if you're lucky, an invitation to a banquet. These are the times when the social pecking order is both tested and cemented. And while Roman women might not wield political power directly, the influence exerted within their own circles is nothing to scoff at. So there you have it, the life of a Roman woman, stripped of its marble veneer and served with a side of reality. It's a world where the mundane meets the monumental, where every sestrius counts, and where survival is a daily achievement. It's not quite the stuff of epic poetry, but it's real, it's relentless, and it's utterly Roman. Speaking of survival, let's talk about the battlefield that is Roman marriage. Forget about walking down the aisle. Imagine your life being a series of negotiations and contracts. Yep, love in ancient Rome was less about Cupid's arrows and more about the weight of your dowry. The dowry, or das, was less of a romantic gesture and more of an economic transaction. Think of it as the original prenup. Families would huddle around the negotiation table, calculating what a daughter was worth in terms of land, livestock, or cold, hard cash. A typical dowry might range from a few thousand sestertii for the average Jane to a staggering 100,000 for the patrician elite. Talk about a high-stakes game of the price is right. Once the ink was dry, you were thrust into a world of societal expectations. Roman brides were expected to be the epitome of pudicitia, or modesty, a concept that dictated everything from the cut of your stola to the volume of your voice in public. But don't mistake modesty for meekness. Women wielded influence in subtler ways, often acting as the power behind the throne, or in this case, the triclinium. They navigated the treacherous waters of Roman high society with a deftness that would make any modern-day politician blush. And let's not forget the Roman wedding itself, a celebration that could rival a modern-day celebrity bash. The festivities kicked off with a procession, complete with a torchlit parade led by flute players. Think of it as a mix between a parade and a conga line, but with more laurel leaves and less shaking of the hips. The bride would wear a white tunic, her hair arranged in 6 braids, a nod to the Vestal Virgins, because nothing says bridal fashion like channeling priestesses who took lifelong vows of celibacy. Once married, you weren't just managing a household, you were navigating a labyrinth of legal limitations. Roman women were forever under some form of guardianship, first by their fathers, and later by their husbands or male relatives. This tutela meant that while you could influence household decisions, your legal autonomy was about as solid as a sandcastle at high tide. But Roman women weren't just sitting around knitting togas. Many found ways to bend the rules, using their wit and influence to sway decisions, whether in the home or in the courts. Now, let's talk alliances. Marriages in Rome weren't just personal unions, they were political chess moves. Families used them to forge alliances, strengthen social standing, or consolidate wealth. It wasn't unusual for a woman to find herself married off to a distant cousin or a family friend twice her age, all in the name of social climbing. Love, optional. Political strategy, absolutely necessary. Imagine the holiday gatherings, awkward family dinners with a side of political tension. Despite these constraints, some women rose to prominence, leaving their mark on history. Take Livia Drusilla, for example. As the wife of Augustus, she deftly maneuvered the political landscape, securing her son Tiberius as his successor. Talk about playing the long game. Then there was Agrippina the Younger, who orchestrated her son Nero's rise to power, though that particular story ends with more drama than a soap opera. These women weren't just footnotes in history, they were power players in their own right. Of course, not every woman had aspirations of empire building. Many were content, or resigned, to fulfill their roles within the domestic sphere. But even here, there was room for maneuvering. Women engaged in trade, managed estates, and some even wielded enough economic clout to lend money. A risky business that often made them the ancient equivalent of loan sharks. It was these everyday acts of autonomy that chipped away at the veneer of male dominance. So, there you have it, a glimpse into the social intricacies and absurdities of Roman marital life. It's a world where love takes a backseat to alliances, where dowries are as pivotal as the affair with Antony and Cleopatra, and where women, despite societal shackles, find ways to make their mark. The story doesn't end here, though, as the complexities of Roman society continue to unfold, each layer revealing more about the lives of these remarkable women who were anything but silent spectators in the grand amphitheater of history. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into this ancient soap opera, where every alliance and every contract has a story to tell. So, while we're peeling back layers of this ancient soap opera, let's unwrap the legal landscape that hemmed in Roman women tighter than a poorly fitted stola. And buckle up, because we're diving into property rights and inheritance laws, a thrilling ride through the bureaucratic red tape of ancient Rome. Now, here's a fun fact. Roman women, despite all the societal chest-thumping about their managing prowess, were essentially legal minors for life. Yep, you read that right. They could manage a household, barter at the market, and even lend money. But when it came to owning property, the law treated them like kids trying to play with grown-up toys. You see, Roman women were under tutela, a form of guardianship that required a male overseer to approve any significant legal or financial decision. This guardian could be a father, husband, or even, in a delightful twist of fate, a son. Imagine asking your teenager for permission to buy a piece of land. Talk about flipping the power dynamics. But like any good Roman drama, there's a plot twist. Enter the coemptio, a legal loophole that allowed women a smidgen of autonomy. Through this arrangement, a woman could technically sell herself to her husband in a marked transaction, freeing herself from her father's guardianship. Sounds empowering, right? Well, not quite. She was still subject to her husband's control. It's like swapping one warden for another, with a little more leeway on visiting hours. Now, let's talk about property ownership. While women could possess property, the sticky part was accessing and controlling it. If a woman inherited land, she couldn't just waltz onto it and declare sovereignty. Nope, she'd need her guardian's blessing to sell or even manage it. Imagine owning a villa in Tuscany, but not being able to decide if you want to plant an olive grove or host a bacchanal without some guy's say-so. It's like having a Netflix account, but needing your ex's password to watch anything. And speaking of inheritance, this is where the plot thickens. Roman inheritance laws were as clear as the Tiber during flood season. Women could inherit from their fathers, but here's the catch. They were often passed over in favor of male relatives, unless there were no sons or the family was particularly progressive. Imagine being the eldest daughter, only to watch your younger brother, who still thinks the toga is a napkin, inherit the family estate. It's no wonder some women turn to other means to secure their futures, whether through persuasion, influence, or the odd strategic marriage. Take the case of Cornelia Africana, the mother of the Gracchi brothers. Known for her intelligence and political savvy, Cornelia deftly managed her family's affairs and became a symbol of Roman motherhood. Yet, even she wasn't immune to the legal shackles. Despite her influence, she couldn't fully control her wealth without male approval. Her story is a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of women who worked within and around the system. Despite these hurdles, some women found ways to amass wealth and influence. Enter the world of the matrona, the Roman matron mythologized as a paragon of virtue and domesticity. This image of the powerful matron, draped in dignity and pearls, belied the reality of their limited legal standing. Sure, they could sway decisions and wield influence in their households, but legally they were often as powerless as a toga at a gladiator match. Consider the case of Julia Misa, grandmother to Emperor Elagabalus. Julia was a master of political maneuvering, using her wealth and connections to place her grandsons on the throne. Yet, even she had to operate through male relatives, leveraging her family ties to exert power. It's a classic case of playing the hand you're dealt and bluffing your way to victory. But let's not romanticize this too much. For every woman who found a loophole, countless others were trapped by the rigidity of the legal system. Many were relegated to domestic roles, their ambitions stifled by the lack of legal autonomy. It's a sobering reminder that while some women thrived, many more struggled under the weight of societal expectations. In this grand theater of Roman life, women navigated a labyrinth of legal restrictions, societal norms, and familial obligations with a deftness that would make any modern-day lawyer proud. They were the unsung architects of their families' fortunes, working behind the scenes to ensure survival and prosperity. And while the myth of the powerful Roman matron persists, it's crucial to acknowledge the reality that their power was often limited to the shadows, an influence wielded through whispers and strategic alliances rather than outright authority. So, as we continue this journey through the annals of Roman history, remember that these women were more than just footnotes in a patriarchal society. They were the silent strategists, the unseen hands guiding the destiny of the empire from within the confines of their homes. Their stories, with all their complexities and contradictions, offer a glimpse into the resilience and resourcefulness of those who dared to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman society. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricate web of Roman life, uncovering the stories of those who shaped an empire from the shadows. So, while we've been wading through the bureaucratic quagmire of Roman women's legal lives, let's switch gears to the social scene. Because even ancient Rome had its own version of tick-tock, and spoiler alert, it involved fewer dance challenges and more religious festivals. That's right, Roman women might have been tethered by legal chains, but they certainly knew how to cut a rug a good Saturnalia or two. Let's start with the religious festivals. If you think the Met Gala is a big deal, try wrapping your head around the Megalesia. This was a festival dedicated to Cybele, the great mother of the gods, which kicked off every April. Picture this, a week-long bash featuring parades, music, and dramatic performances. And while Cybele's priests might have been the stars of the show, Roman women played a crucial role in organizing and participating. Think event planners with a penchant for divine drama. Though the festival itself was a religious affair, it was also a social mixer, where connections were forged and gossip flowed as freely as the sacrificial wine. But don't be fooled by the festive facade. These gatherings weren't just about having a good time. They were a strategic exercise in social climbing. For women, these events were one of the few public arenas where they could exert influence and gain visibility. It was less about devotion and more about networking, because nothing says power player like making alliances over a shared libation to the gods. Now, let's step into the world of the Bona Di Festival. Exclusively for women, this secretive event was dedicated to the goddess of fertility and chastity. It was like a ladies' night, but with a strict no men allowed policy. Even male statues were covered up to ensure the sanctity of the space. Here, women could let their proverbial hair down, free from the prying eyes of their male counterparts. But this wasn't just a party, it was a power play. Imagine the combined might of Rome's influential women, all gathered under one roof. It was an exclusive club with a hefty entry fee, a reminder that in Rome, as in life, exclusivity often equated to influence. And speaking of influence, let's not forget the Vestal Virgins. These women were the ultimate influencers of their time, maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta and ensuring Rome's prosperity. Selected as young girls, they committed to 30 years of service, which included privileges like their own seats at the games and the ability to free condemned prisoners. It's like if your favorite Instagram influencer could pardon felons with a well-timed post. But beneath the glamour lay the harsh reality. A Vestal who broke her vow of chastity faced being buried alive, a pretty severe consequence for a lapse in judgment. Now, onto the public spectacles. Roman women might not have been in the Colosseum's front row, but they certainly enjoyed a good show. The Circus Maximus, Rome's premier venue for chariot races, could hold around 150,000 spectators. Women of all classes attended, from the lowly plebeian to the lofty patrician, because who could resist the thrill of watching a four-horse chariot race at breakneck speeds? It was the ancient equivalent of Formula One, minus the engine noise, and with a lot more toga-wearing fans. But let's not gloss over the social dynamics at play. While women were present, their seating was segregated, a literal reminder of their limited role in public life. Yet, these events were a microcosm of Roman society, where the boundaries of class and status were both solidified and subverted. A woman's presence at such events was both a statement and a strategy, because in Rome, appearances were everything, and being seen in the right places was akin to having a verified blue checkmark. Despite the entertainment options, let's not over-romanticize life as a Roman woman. If you're imagining glamorous banquets with decadent feasting, reel it back a notch. Sure, there were parties, but the average woman's life was more likely filled with work than wine. The reality was a daily grind of chores, limited rights, and the occasional escape into the world of public festivities or religious rites. However, it's in these moments of leisure and community that we glimpse the resilience and adaptability of Roman women. They maneuvered through a society that alternately idolized and restricted them, finding ways to assert their presence in the public sphere, even if it was sometimes through the back door. Whether it was through a festival, a race, or a secret gathering, these women carved out spaces where they could express themselves beyond the confines of their daily roles. So, the next time you're scrolling through Instagram, watching influencers parade their latest conquests, spare a thought for the Roman women who were doing much the same, albeit with less filter and more toga. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring human spirit, the quest for connection, and the relentless pursuit of agency in a world that often denied them just that. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Roman life, Stay tuned for more stories of those who defied the odds and etched their mark on history, one festival at a time. And speaking of carving out spaces, let's talk about the bigger picture of Roman women's legacy, a tapestry woven from threads of resilience, influence, and a dash of rebellion. You see, the story of Roman women is often romanticized, shrouded in the marble glow of statues and the poetic whispers of ancient texts. But let's peel back the layers of myth to reveal the gritty reality underneath. First off, the romantic notion of the all-powerful Roman matron. It's a bit like thinking of gladiators as suave, well-moisturized models. Sure, they had influence, but it was often relegated to the domestic sphere. Society expected women to be the architects of home life, and while they did wield considerable clout within those walls, their public power was as ephemeral as a Roman candle. In fact, Roman law was about as flexible as a concrete pillar when it came to women's rights. Despite their managerial prowess, women were legally considered perpetual minors, a status that would leave any modern feminist clutching her pearls or her protest sign. Now, let's take a closer look at education, or the lack thereof. While some daughters of the elite were tutored alongside their brothers, the average Roman girl's curriculum was about as varied as a Roman road, straightforward and utilitarian. Education was mostly practical, focusing on household management and social graces. Advanced education was rare and often reserved for those with the means to afford it. Think of it as an ancient version of finishing school, minus the Instagram posts of graduation caps in the air. But let's not paint all Roman women with the same brush. There were trailblazers who defied societal norms and left a lasting impact on history. Take Hypatia of Alexandria, a philosopher and mathematician who taught men at the famed Library of Alexandria. Her intellectual prowess was so revered that even centuries later, she's remembered as a symbol of knowledge and reason. Yet, her life ended tragically, a stark reminder of the volatility of women's positions in a male-dominated society. And then there's the legendary Cleopatra, often portrayed as the femme fatale of the ancient world. But strip away the Hollywood glam, and you'll find a savvy political operator who spoke multiple languages and held her own in the testosterone-fueled arena of Roman politics. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face. She was a ruler who played the political game with a finesse that left even Julius Caesar and Mark Antony spellbound. Despite her tragic end, her legacy endures, a testament to her skill in navigating a world designed to keep her out. However, let's not ignore the everyday Roman women, the unsung heroines who kept the empire ticking. They were the bread bakers, the cloth weavers, the market sellers. Their contributions were often overlooked by history, but they were the backbone of the Roman economy. Without them, the bustling markets and thriving cities would have ground to a halt, and while they might not have statues erected in their honor, their legacy is etched in the very fabric of Roman society. Let's debunk one more myth while we're at it. The idea that all Roman women were idle, draped in silks, and lounging on couches, fed grapes by doting slaves. The truth is far more relatable. Most women worked tirelessly, whether managing households or participating in trade. And while the elite enjoyed luxuries, the majority of Roman women knew the value of hard work and thrift, skills that ensured their family's survival in a world where fortunes could turn as quickly as a chariot wheel. So, what does all this mean for us today? The legacy of Roman women is a complex mosaic of strength and subjugation, influence and invisibility. Their stories remind us that the fight for gender equality is not a modern invention, but a continuation of struggles that stretch back millennia. By understanding their world, we gain insight into our own, a world where gender roles are still being redefined, and the past continues to shape the present. In conclusion, Roman women were more than the sum of their societal constraints. They were formidable forces within their families and communities, carving out roles that defied the limitations placed upon them. Their legacy is a testament to the resilience of women throughout history, a reminder that even in the most patriarchal of societies, women have found ways to assert their presence, challenge norms, and influence the course of history. So the next time you hear tales of Roman splendor and intrigue, remember to look beyond the marble facades and epic narratives. Consider the lives of the women who lived in that world, who cooked and cleaned, plotted and planned, loved and lost. Their untold stories offer a rich tapestry of human experience, one that echoes through the ages, reminding us of the indomitable spirit of women who, despite the odds, left an indelible mark on history. And as we continue to uncover these hidden stories, let's celebrate their resilience, learn from their struggles, and honor their legacy in our ongoing quest for equality and understanding. In the grand spectacle of history, the founding of Rome stands out as a blockbuster myth, complete with sibling rivalry, divine intervention, and a wolf that doubles as a babysitter. No CGI needed. At the heart of this legend are Romulus and Remus, twin brothers with a backstory that could make any soap opera writer nod approvingly. According to the tale, they were the offspring of a Vestal virgin and the war god Mars. Talk about a family with connections, but before you start scribbling down Mars as your emergency contact, let's unpack what's going on here. The story goes that these two were unceremoniously dumped into the Tiber River, only to be rescued by a she-wolf. Interestingly, lupa in Latin was slang for a woman of questionable reputation, suggesting the brothers' savior might not have been entirely four-legged. A bit of wordplay that would make Shakespeare proud, minus the Elizabethan tights. The duo grew up, overthrew a tyrant, and decided to build a city. Naturally, this led to a rather unfortunate dispute over who'd be the top dog or wolf, resulting in Romulus committing the ultimate sibling betrayal, fratricide. And thus, around 753 BCE, Rome was born atop the blood of Remus. Talk about a rocky start. Now, the myth is a great yarn, but let's be real. Rome's actual beginnings were less about divine destiny and more about gritty realities. While Romulus gets the credit, the real story of Rome's rise is written in sweat, strategy, and a fair bit of opportunistic land grabbing. As the city grew from a cluster of huts to a burgeoning power, Rome wasn't exactly the benevolent neighbor. Think less, welcome to the neighborhood, and more nice land you got there. It'd be a shame if someone annexed it. Rome's early expansion was fueled by a cocktail of economic necessity and military might. The people of early Rome needed resources, plain and simple. Far from being content with their hilly real estate, they looked to the fertile lands of the surrounding Latium region. The city was strategically positioned along the Tiber, making it a crossroads of trade and a prime launching pad for territorial ambitions. It wasn't long before Rome was knocking on the doors of nearby towns, offering a deal they couldn't refuse, sometimes literally. One key moment in this expansion was the Battle of Lake Regillus around 496 BCE. Rome's victory against the Latin League, a coalition of neighboring cities, was pivotal. It established Rome as the dominant power in the region, setting the stage for further conquests. The battle itself is steeped in legend, with tales of divine cavalry appearing on the battlefield. But divine horses or not, the outcome was clear. Rome was on the rise, and it had no plans of slowing down. It's tempting to romanticize these early conquests as a noble pursuit of destiny, but the reality was far more pragmatic. Each new territory meant more resources, more manpower, and more wealth flowing into Rome's coffers. This wasn't about fulfilling a mythical prophecy. It was about cold, hard economics. With each victory, Rome's influence expanded. Its appetite for growth only increased. In many ways, the early Romans were the original venture capitalists, investing in land and people rather than tech startups. They understood that power was rooted in resources, and that control over trade routes was as valuable as any magical sword in a stone. By the time Rome had its sights set on the rest of the Italian peninsula, it was less a city and more a juggernaut of ambition. But let's not gloss over the human cost. Rome's expansion wasn't just about clever strategies and economic gain. It was also about subjugation and cultural assimilation, a euphemism for our way or the highway. The conquered peoples were often left with little choice but to integrate into the Roman system, adopting their laws, paying their taxes, and sending their sons to fight in Rome's armies. This wasn't exactly the sharing is caring philosophy. The early Roman Republic, for all its democratic pretensions, was an oligarchy where power was concentrated among a few elite families. These patricians controlled the Senate, and by extension, the direction of Rome's military campaigns. Their decisions were driven as much by personal gain as by the supposed glory of Rome. It's no coincidence that many of the conquered lands ended up in the hands of these already wealthy families. Expanding the Republic's territory often meant expanding their own estates. So, while the founding myth of Rome gives us a tale of destiny and divine favor, the reality is more a story of calculated risk and relentless expansion. The Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and their rise to power was built on a foundation of economic necessity and strategic conquest. The legend of Romulus and Remus might capture the imagination, but it's the gritty details of Rome's early expansion that reveal the true nature of this ancient powerhouse. And as history has shown, when it comes to empires, the devil is always in the details. So, we've romped through the rocky beginnings of Rome, twin drama, divine wolves, and a city that hit the ground running with expansionist zeal. But now, let's pivot to the juicy bit, the rise of the Roman Republic, a political experiment that was as much about power plays as it was about the people's voice. Spoiler alert, it wasn't always pretty. Picture the Roman Republic as a grand stage where every actor had an agenda, and the script was rewritten on the fly. It all kicked off around 509 BCE when the Romans decided they'd had enough of kings. Down with the monarchy, they cried, and up went the Republic, a system that promised more voices in the political arena. But before you break out the democracy pom-poms, let's dig deeper. The Roman Republic was less about the bustling agora and more about a tightly knit elite pulling the strings. Think of it as democracy's exclusive club, with a bouncer called Patricius. The heart of this new political machine was the Senate, a body supposedly representing the Roman people, but actually dominated by the patrician class. These guys were the creme de la creme of Roman society, families who could trace their lineage back to the city's founding. At least that's what they claimed over their wine-soaked dinners. The Senate was the playground of these elite families, making decisions that often favored their interests. Ever heard of the phrase, follow the money? The Romans practically invented it. But let's not forget the plebeians, the everyday Romans who made up the bulk of the population. These folks weren't content to just cheer from the sidelines. They wanted in on the action, and their struggle for political representation is a story of grit and tenacity. Cue the conflict of the orders, a centuries-long showdown that makes modern political dramas look like kindergarten squabbles. The plebeians fought tooth and nail for rights and representation, demanding a piece of the political pie. Over time, they won significant concessions, including the creation of the office of the tribune of the plebs, a position that wielded real power and had the nifty ability to veto decisions made by the Senate. A win for the little guy, sort of. Now let's talk economics because, let's face it, even in ancient Rome, money talked. The Roman economy was a complex beast, driven by agriculture, trade, and of course, conquest. Those glorious conquests we mentioned earlier, they weren't just about glory and expanding the map. They were a financial strategy. War brought spoils, slaves, and resources, fueling the economy and lining the pockets of the Senate's power brokers. It was a classic case of, you've got to spend money to make money. Only the spending was on legions, and the returns were in newly acquired territory. But this economic boom came at a cost. The Punic Wars, a series of 3 bloody conflicts between Rome and Carthage from 264 to 146 BCE, were a prime example. These wars were epic in scale and devastating in their impact, with the Second Punic War alone costing Rome around 160,000 Roman lives and untold numbers of denarii. Yet, despite the staggering human and economic toll, Rome emerged victorious, and Carthage was reduced to a footnote in history, its lands now a Roman province. The wars solidified Rome's status as the dominant power in the Mediterranean, but they also exposed the fragility of its social fabric. The aftermath of the Punic Wars saw a widening gap between rich and poor, as wealthy landowners scooped up land, leaving small farmers struggling to compete. This economic disparity fueled social unrest and political upheaval, a ticking time bomb that the Senate could only ignore for so long. Enter the Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, who attempted to address these inequalities through radical land reforms. Their efforts stirred the pot, and eventually led to their untimely deaths, martyrs in the eyes of some, rabble-rousers to others. The romanticized image of Rome as a bastion of virtue and republican ideals was shadowed by these gritty realities. While Roman virtues like gravitas, pietas, and virtus were celebrated, the political landscape was a minefield of ambition, betrayal, and power struggles. Senators weren't averse to dabbling in back-alley politics if it meant advancing their careers. Assassinations, bribery, and corruption were all part of the game. The Republic was a stage where the curtain was always half drawn, revealing glimpses of the underbelly that would make Machiavelli's pulse quicken. The rise of the Roman Republic wasn't just a neat transition from monarchy to democracy. It was a complex evolution, a balancing act between tradition and innovation, power and populism. It was a system that, for all its flaws, managed to endure for nearly 500 years. But as history shows us, even the most resilient systems are vulnerable to internal pressures and external forces. So, as we continue to unravel the threads of Rome's historical tapestry, keep in mind that beneath the marble facade of temples and the stirring speeches of orators lay a world of gritty realities and hard-fought battles. Both on and off the battlefield, the Roman Republic was a masterpiece of ambition and contradiction, a testament to the enduring complexity of power and the human spirit's relentless quest for control. And as we peel back the layers, the story only gets more compelling, with twists and turns that no one could have predicted. Stay tuned, because the saga of Rome is far from over. As the curtain rises on the next act of Rome's grand saga, we find ourselves on the cusp of transformation, with the Republic teetering on the edge of its own ambition. Enter Julius Caesar, a name that needs no introduction but warrants a closer look. This guy was a game-changer, and not just because he looked dashing in a toga. Caesar's story is one of audacious ambition, a narrative so compelling it feels scripted, yet it's all too real and bloody. Julius Caesar wasn't born with a silver spoon, but he sure knew how to polish one when he saw it. Born in 100 BCE to a patrician family that had seen better days, young Julius was a man on a mission. He quickly realized that power in Rome was like a game of musical chairs. If you wanted a seat, you'd better make your moves count. By the time he was in his 20s, Caesar was making waves, not content to just blend into the patrician wallpaper. His climb up the political ladder was swift and strategic, like a chess player who always seemed to be 2 moves ahead. Fast forward to 60 BCE, and Caesar's political career was in full swing. He formed the first triumvirate with Pompey and Crassus, a power trio that would make even the most dysfunctional rock band look harmonious. This wasn't a friendship forged over shared interests in ancient philosophy or epic poetry. It was a pragmatic coalition built on mutual benefit. Pompey brought military might, Crassus had more money than Midas, and Caesar, well, he had ambition by the bucketful. Together, they held Rome in the palm of their marble-sculpted hands. But as history loves to remind us, such alliances are often as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Caesar's military exploits were legendary, and his conquest of Gaul from 58 to 50 BCE stands out as a masterclass in expansionism. Over these 8 years, he expanded Rome's territory by about 640,000 square kilometers, essentially turning Gaul into his own personal project. His Commentarii de Bello Gallico, a series of reports on his campaigns, were less about chronicling history and more about crafting his legacy. Think of them as the ancient Roman version of a PR campaign, with Caesar ensuring his name was on everyone's lips back in Rome. These conquests weren't just about glory. They were a financial windfall, bringing untold wealth and thousands of slaves into the Roman economy, fueling both its growth and its inequalities. But while Caesar was busy building his empire in Gaul, the political situation back in Rome was unraveling faster than a toga in a windstorm. The Senate, wary of Caesar's rising power, recalled him to Rome, demanding he disband his army. Caesar, never one to follow orders like some obedient legionnaire, famously crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE with his army in tow, uttering the phrase Alia Iacta Est, the die is cast. This wasn't just a dramatic gesture. It was the point of no return, a declaration of war against the Senate itself. Crossing the Rubicon wasn't just a river crossing. It was Caesar's way of saying, I'm all in. This act of defiance set off a civil war that would reshape Rome's political landscape. Caesar vs. Pompey wasn't exactly a fair fight. Imagine David vs. Goliath, but both of them are wearing Roman sandals. By 48 BCE, Caesar had defeated Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, and by 45 BCE, he was the unchallenged ruler of Rome, a dictator in all but name. Rome's transformation from republic to empire was well underway, with Caesar at the helm steering the ship. It was a seismic shift in power dynamics, and not everyone was thrilled about it. Now, let's talk about the infamous Ides of March, that fateful day in 44 BCE when Caesar's ambition finally caught up with him. The soothsayer's warning to beware the Ides of March wasn't just melodrama, it was a harbinger of things to come. On March 15, Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators who feared his power and ambition. Among them was his supposed friend Brutus. The assassination was as much a political statement as it was a brutal act of betrayal, an attempt to restore the Republic by removing its most powerful figure. Yet, as history would show, the Republic was already on life support, and Caesar's death only hastened its transformation into an empire. The economic and social factors that fueled Rome's shift from Republic to empire were as complex as Caesar's own machinations. War and conquest had brought immense wealth to Rome, but this wealth was unevenly distributed, widening the gap between the rich and poor. The economic boom had given rise to a new class of wealthy equestrians and freedmen who wielded significant influence, challenging the traditional patrician order. Meanwhile, the influx of slaves from conquered territories reshaped Rome's labor market, driving small farmers out of business and into the city in search of work. Politically, the Republic was a victim of its own success. Its institutions, designed for a city-state, struggled to govern an empire. The Senate, once the bastion of oligarchic control, was increasingly seen as out of touch with the needs of Rome's diverse and sprawling territories. The power struggles and civil wars of the late Republic exposed these weaknesses, creating a vacuum that ambitious leaders like Caesar were all too eager to fill. Caesar's assassination, intended to save the Republic, instead plunged Rome into further chaos, paving the way for the rise of his heir, Octavian, and the eventual establishment of the Roman Empire. The transition wasn't just about power, it was about pragmatism. An empire, with its centralized authority, was better suited to manage the vast territories and diverse populations that Rome now controlled. The Republic's ideals may have been noble, but in practice, they were ill-equipped to handle the realities of Rome's new status as a global superpower. In the end, Julius Caesar's role in Rome's transformation from republic to empire was both a catalyst and a cautionary tale. His ambition reshaped the political landscape, setting the stage for the rise of emperors and the decline of republican ideals. Yet, for all his achievements, his story is a reminder of the perils of unchecked power and the fragility of political systems in the face of change. As we prepare to delve deeper into the next chapter of Rome's history, it's clear that Caesar's legacy is as complex as the man himself, a blend of charisma, ambition, and the relentless drive for control that ultimately reshaped the world. Stay tuned, because the Emperor's new groove is about to take center stage, and the story is far from over. As the Roman Republic made its dramatic exit, stage left, the Roman Empire swaggered onto the scene with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a civilization that practically invented grandiosity. Enter Augustus Caesar, the artist formerly known as Octavian. If Julius Caesar was the opening act, Augustus was the headliner, turning Rome's chaotic encore into an imperial symphony. Augustus, the adopted heir of Julius Caesar, was a master of branding long before social media influencers were a thing. Born Gaius Octavius Thurinus in 63 BCE, he was a shrewd operator, playing the political game like a seasoned chess grandmaster. After Caesar's assassination, he deftly navigated Rome's treacherous waters, ultimately emerging as the first Roman emperor in 27 BCE. Augustus didn't just inherit a chaotic Rome, he transformed it, laying the foundation for an empire that would shape the course of history for centuries. Augustus' reign, which lasted until 14 CE, was a masterclass in combining military might with economic savvy. He understood that to rule an empire stretching from Spain to Syria, he needed more than just legions. He needed a strategy that balanced expansion with stability. Augustus didn't just conquer territories, he integrated them, creating a network of provinces governed by local elites who were given a stake in the imperial system. This wasn't just enlightened leadership. It was a practical approach to keeping the empire's vast and diverse populations in check. One of Augustus' most significant achievements was the establishment of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability across the empire that lasted for over 200 years. This wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was the result of Augustus' careful management. He reduced the size of the army from about 60 legions to 28, a strategic downsizing that was less about cutting costs and more about ensuring loyalty. He stationed these legions along the empire's borders, creating a formidable defensive ring that discouraged would-be invaders. Augustus knew that a stable empire was a prosperous one, and he was determined to keep the peace. Economically, Augustus was no slouch either. He overhauled the tax system, making it more efficient and less prone to corruption. This was not just an exercise in civic duty. It was a calculated move to fill Rome's coffers and fund public works that would keep the populace content. He famously boasted that he found Rome a city of bricks and left it a city of marble. This wasn't just a boast. It was a testament to his investment in infrastructure. Roads, aqueducts, and public buildings sprouted across the empire like mushrooms after a rainstorm, connecting far-flung provinces and fostering trade. Speaking of trade, let's not overlook Rome's economic engine, the Mediterranean Sea, which the Romans cheekily dubbed Mare Nostrum, our sea. The empire's naval dominance turned the Mediterranean into a bustling highway of commerce, with goods flowing from Egypt's grain to Spain's silver. This trade network wasn't just a boon to Rome's economy. It was the lifeblood of the empire, ensuring that its cities were well fed and its markets bustling. But let's pump the brakes on the romanticism for a moment. While Augustus was hailed as a bringer of peace and prosperity, the reality was more complex. His reign was secured through shrewd political maneuvering and, yes, a fair bit of ruthlessness. Augustus might have claimed the mantle of first among equals, but in truth, he was an autocrat whose power was absolute. He cleverly maintained the facade of the Republic, keeping institutions like the Senate intact while stripping them of real power. This was less about preserving tradition and more about maintaining control. And while the Pax Romana is often portrayed as a golden age, it wasn't exactly paradise for everyone. The provinces, though integrated into the empire, were often heavily taxed, with local economies drained to feed Rome's insatiable appetite for goods and entertainment. Slavery was rampant, fueling the economy, but also sowing seeds of discontent. The empire's stability was built on the backs of the conquered, a reality that the marble statues rarely reflected. Moreover, the myth of Rome's invincibility was just that, a myth. Beneath the empire's shiny veneer were cracks that even Augustus couldn't entirely conceal. The empire's borders, while secure for the moment, were constantly threatened by external forces like the Germanic tribes and Parthians. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 CE was a stark reminder of Rome's vulnerabilities, as 3 legions were wiped out by Germanic forces, a defeat that haunted Roman military strategy for years. Internally, the empire faced challenges as well. The immense wealth flowing into Rome widened the gap between the rich and poor, creating social tensions that simmered beneath the surface. Augustus' reforms, while effective in the short term, couldn't completely quell these issues. His successors would inherit an empire that, while mighty, was also a powder keg of potential unrest. So, as we marvel at the heights of the Roman Empire under Augustus, let's not forget the price of that grandeur. The empire was a complex machine, its gears oiled by both the blood of its soldiers and the labor of its subjects. Augustus may have been a visionary leader, but he was also a pragmatist who understood that empire building was as much about managing expectations as it was about conquering new lands. As we continue to explore Rome's storied past, remember that even the brightest stars cast shadows, a fitting metaphor for an empire that was as glorious as it was flawed. Stay tuned, because the story of Rome's triumphs and trials is far from over. The Roman Empire at its zenith was like a well-oiled machine, until it wasn't. Augustus might have set the stage, but even the most impressive curtain hides a backstage mess. Fast forward a few centuries, and the empire is less a beacon of power and more a cautionary tale. So, what happened? Let's unravel the mystery of Rome's decline, a story of internal rot and external blows that should have been a Shakespearean tragedy, but turned into more of a bureaucratic farce. First, let's talk about the economy, the real Achilles heel of the empire. Rome's economic system was propped up by constant expansion. Conquer a region, loot its treasures, rinse and repeat. But when the empire reached its geographical limits, expansion slowed, and so did the flow of new wealth. The government, desperate to keep the imperial machine running, resorted to debasing the currency, reducing the silver content in coins. By the 3rd century, the denarius had lost about 90% of its silver content. Imagine paying for a Ferrari with monopoly money. Rome's economy was teetering on the same precipice. This economic turmoil was compounded by political corruption. The Roman Senate, once the stalwart of power, had devolved into a den of iniquity, where positions were bought and sold like cheap trinkets at a market stall. Emperors came and went with alarming frequency, especially in the chaotic 3rd century, a time known as the crisis of the 3rd century. In just 50 years, Rome saw about 26 emperors, a turnover rate that would make a fast food restaurant blush. Each new ruler promised reform, but often ended up adding to the chaos, looting the treasury to pay off restless soldiers or fund lavish games to distract the populace. Now, let's add barbarians to the mix. Contrary to the dramatic tales of barbarian hordes sweeping down like an avalanche, the reality was more of a slow, relentless erosion. Germanic tribes like the Goths and the Vandals didn't just appear overnight. They were more like persistent houseguests who eventually took over the living room. The Battle of Adrianople in 378 CE was a wake-up call, where the Romans, led by Emperor Valens, faced the Goths and were soundly defeated. It was a military debacle that revealed just how vulnerable the Roman legions had become. The empire wasn't brought down by a single decisive battle, but by a gradual process of attrition. Then there's the social fabric of the empire, which was fraying faster than a toga in a storm. The rich were getting richer, and the poor were getting poorer, a tale as old as time. The divide between the elite and the common folk widened, with land concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy families. Small farmers, squeezed by taxes and unable to compete with the estates worked by cheap slave labor, abandoned their lands and flocked to the cities. Rome, once a bustling metropolis, became overcrowded and unsanitary, a breeding ground for disease and discontent. Religion, too, played its part in the empire's transformation. The rise of Christianity, a faith that promised eternal salvation, was both a unifying force and a source of division. Emperor Constantine's Edict of Milan in 313 CE legalized Christianity, a move that altered the religious landscape of the empire. While this helped unify the empire under a common religion, it also led to internal strife, as Christian doctrine clashed with traditional Roman paganism. By the time Emperor Theodosius declared Christianity the state religion in 380 CE, the empire was both spiritually and politically divided. Let's not forget the administrative headaches of running such a vast empire. The Roman Empire was a behemoth, stretching over 5 million square kilometers at its height. Governing this sprawling territory was like herding cats, only the cats were rebellious provinces and ambitious generals. Diocletian tried to tackle this issue with his tetrarchy system, dividing the empire into 4 regions, each with its own ruler. On paper, it was a brilliant solution. In practice, it was a recipe for power struggles and fragmentation. So, what lessons can we glean from Rome's fall? Well, if history has a sense of humor, it's the dark kind, reminding us that no empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to the forces of economic mismanagement and political corruption. Rome's decline wasn't some epic, catastrophic event. It was death by 1,000 cuts, slow unraveling that serves as a cautionary tale for any civilization that grows too complacent on past glories. In the end, the fall of Rome is a sobering reminder of the cyclical nature of history. Empires rise and fall, leaders come and go, and yet we seem perpetually doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. As we stand on the shoulders of giants, it's worth remembering that even the mightiest can stumble if they take their eyes off the precarious tightrope of governance. Rome's legacy, for all its grandeur, is a testament to the complex, often messy reality of empire building, a reality that echoes through the ages, whispering its lessons to those willing to listen. And with that, dear listener, our tale of Rome comes to a close, a saga of ambition, triumph, and inevitable decline. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never stop exploring the fascinating tapestry of history. If you've ever had one of those weeks where everything you touch turns to chaos, welcome to the world of ancient civilizations. But today, we're diving into the granddaddy of all implosions, the Roman Empire. Yes, the Romans, with their toga parties and Latin blabbering, were the original drama queens when it came to spectacular rises and even more spectacular falls. In the beginning, Rome wasn't built in a day, thankfully, because that would have made for some shoddy architecture. But here's the kicker. The Roman Empire wasn't just about gladiators, orgies, and Julius Caesar getting stabby with it. It was a complex civilization that mastered the art of infrastructure, economy, and unfortunately, political blunders. They built a network of roads spanning over 250,000 miles, which is more than the distance to the moon. And speaking of their roads, ever heard of the saying, all roads lead to Rome? Well, that was their version of we're the center of the universe, deal with it. But let's talk Turkey, or rather, their economic smorgasbord. At its peak, the Roman Empire was a bustling marketplace of about 70 million souls by the 2nd century AD. Imagine trying to manage a group chat with that many people. Their currency, the denarius, was as common as cat memes today. Unfortunately, the Romans had a penchant for debasing their currency, mixing it with cheaper metals. Think of it as the ancient version of printing money, and you can guess how that turned out. Hello, inflation. Now, let's discuss the political scene, which was more chaotic than a reality TV reunion. The Roman government was a carousel of power struggles, with emperors being overthrown faster than you can say, et tu, brute. By the time the 3rd century rolled around, Rome had churned through more emperors than you've had heart dinners, 26 in just 50 years, and most of them met their end in some game of throne-style intrigue. And then there was the military, the pride of Rome, with their disciplined legions and innovative tactics. They conquered lands faster than Rome could figure out what to do with them. But here's where things get dicey, overstretching. When your empire's borders stretch from Britain to Egypt, managing that beast is like trying to keep a 100-headed hydra happy. By the late empire, the military was less of a well-oiled machine and more of a clunky contraption. They were relying on mercenaries, foreign soldiers with loyalties as fickle as a cat's affection. But let's not forget the infrastructure, because the Romans were basically the IKEA of the ancient world. They built aqueducts that could move water across miles, defying gravity with nothing but sheer ingenuity and a lot of slave labor. The Aqua Claudia, one of the largest aqueducts, stretched over 69 kilometers and supplied Rome with enough water to fill 300 Olympic-sized swimming pools per day. Who needs a breeder filter when you've got Roman engineering? Yet, beneath this veneer of marble-clad glory lay the cracks of societal pressure and unrest. The plebs were often the last to reap the benefits of Rome's conquests. There was a divide as wide as the Colosseum between the haves and the have-nots, and the bread and circuses strategy only worked for so long before the masses wanted more than just entertainment. They wanted equity. Now, let's debunk a few myths, shall we? The Roman Empire wasn't felled by one single cataclysmic event, like some historians might romanticize. It was more of a slow-motion car crash, with economic turmoil, political instability, and military overreach all playing a part. And while the stories of barbarian invasions make for thrilling tales, the truth is, Rome was already crumbling from within before the Visigoths came knocking in 410 AD. So, what's the takeaway from Rome's fall? It's that even the mightiest empires can wobble and tumble if they don't watch their spending, keep their politics in check, and avoid biting off more than they can chew. In the end, the Roman Empire serves as a cautionary tale about overconfidence, mismanagement, and the dangers of letting your empire run on autopilot. And there you have it, the rise and fall of Rome, a saga of ambition and hubris that reminds us all that even the grandest empires need a little humility. Here's to hoping we learn something from Rome's epic misadventures, or at least that we enjoy the show. Now that we've unpacked Rome's turbulent saga, let's set our sights on the enigmatic land of pyramids and pharaohs, ancient Egypt. If Rome was the great party that eventually got out of hand, Egypt was the original influencer, mastering the art of self-promotion long before Instagram was a twinkle in a tech mogul's eye. Let's talk about the pharaohs. These rulers weren't just kings, they were god kings, and boy, did they lean into it. If you think modern politicians have a knack for self-aggrandizing PR campaigns, they've got nothing on these ancient rulers. The pharaohs curated their public image with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. They commissioned temples, monuments, and yes, those iconic pyramids, all to broadcast their divine right to rule. If social media had existed back then, you can bet your last denarius their selfies would have been epic. Take Ramses Roman II, for instance. This guy wasn't just about leaving a legacy. He wanted to be remembered for eternity. He reigned for 66 years, and if you were to count the number of statues he commissioned of himself, you'd need more fingers than a centipede. Ramses wasn't just about quantity. He was also about strategic marketing. He told tales of his military prowess with a flair that would make a Hollywood action director blush. The Battle of Kadesh. According to Ramses, it was his greatest triumph, painted with strokes of heroism that barely had a nodding acquaintance with reality. But hey, in the world of PR, perception is often more potent than facts. Now, let's pivot to those pyramids. K.A., the ultimate testament to Egypt's grandeur. Myths abound about how these architectural marvels came to be, with some suggesting aliens had a hand in their construction. But before you start dialing up Mulder and Scully, let's set the record straight. These colossal structures were the result of human sweat, ingenuity, and sadly, a whole lot of backbreaking labor. The Great Pyramid of Giza, completed around 2560 BC, was a staggering feat. Standing at 481 feet tall, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world for nearly 4,000 years. Take that, Eiffel Tower. The construction of such monuments wasn't left to the whims of extraterrestrial visitors, but to the hands of tens of thousands of workers, including skilled laborers who toiled under the scorching sun. These workers were housed in nearby villages, and contrary to popular belief, they weren't slaves but often paid laborers, drafted as part of a national service, if you will. They were compensated with bread and beer, staple currency in ancient Egypt, and quite honestly, not a bad gig if you consider it was on the state's dime. But let's not gloss over the human cost. The conditions were grueling, and although they received sustenance and shelter, the work was brutal. Imagine lugging massive limestone blocks weighing between 5 to 15 tons each. That's no pyramid scheme. It's an endurance marathon. Economically, Egypt was as innovative as it was confounding. Take their grain storage system, for example. Grain wasn't just food. It was currency, a means to pay workers, and a tool to stabilize the economy. The government maintained vast granaries that would make a modern-day prepper jealous. This system allowed Egypt to withstand droughts and famines, ensuring that the population didn't go hungry when the Nile was less than generous with its floods. Ah, the Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt. It provided not just water, but fertile soil, thanks to its annual inundations. The saying, "Egypt is the gift of the Nile," wasn't just poetic. It was an economic reality, but managing this bounty required taxation that would make a modern IRS agent feel right at home. Farmers paid their dues in grain, which meant that a plentiful harvest was both a personal and state affair. Pharaohs wielded taxation like a fine art, balancing the need to fund their ambitious projects against the risk of overburdening their citizens. It was a delicate dance that, when mishandled, could lead to unrest, a lesson some modern governments might do well to heed. To wrap our heads around the sheer scale of Egypt's ancient economy, consider this. During the height of its power, Egypt's annual grain output was enough to feed millions. Talk about having your bread and eating it too. So while the allure of gold and treasure often dominates tales of Egypt's wealth, the true treasure was in its fields, where the economy was as much about sustenance as it was about splendor. So, what can we learn from this? Egypt's story isn't just one of pyramids and pharaohs. It's a tale of strategic vision, economic innovation, and an understanding of the power of image. A narrative as relevant today as it was over 4,000 years ago. And as we peel back the layers of this ancient civilization, we see a society that, despite its mystique and grandeur, was grounded in the practicalities of survival and legacy building. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of Egypt's fascinating narrative. Now let's sail across the Mediterranean to the land where democracy first dipped its toes into the political waters, ancient Greece. Picture this. It's not all togas and philosophers pondering life's mysteries in sun-drenched courtyards. In reality, Greece was a patchwork quilt of city-states, each with its own government system, ranging from the democratic Athens to the military-centric Sparta. If you've ever wondered how democracy could be both inspiring and a hot mess, Athens is your place. The Athenian democracy wasn't a slick, well-oiled machine, but more of a rickety wagon with square wheels. It was a direct democracy, which sounds great until you realize it involved thousands of citizens gathering to vote on every decision. Imagine trying to decide what's for dinner, but with 6,000 opinions to consider. And speaking of those citizens, let's not forget that this democracy only extended to free adult males. Women, slaves, and foreigners. Sorry, your opinions were as welcome as a thunderstorm at a beach party. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The Athenians did establish some political concepts that have stuck around, like the idea that power should be spread out to prevent any one person from becoming a tyrant. However, their economic practices were less illustrious. Athens' economy was a roller coaster of booms and busts, with debt crises that would make modern economists reach for their stress balls. In fact, there was a point when debt slavery was so rampant that the poor were literally selling themselves into servitude to pay off their dues. Enter Solon, the great reformer, who hit the reset button on debt, freeing those hapless souls and cancelling debts in a move that was part humanitarian, part economic reboot. Despite these efforts, Athens' economy was still as volatile as a cat on a hot tin roof. Their currency, made from the silver mines of Laurium, was as much a blessing as it was a curse. While it brought wealth, it also tied the economy to the whims of the market and the fluctuating supply of silver. And when times got tough, Athens had a habit of minting more coins, leading to, you guessed it, good old inflation. Meanwhile, over in Sparta, things were a bit different. If Athens was the flamboyant cousin always in the spotlight, Sparta was the stoic sibling who lived frugally and shunned luxury. The Spartans were famous for their minimalist lifestyle, which would make even the most devoted Marie Kondo disciple proud. Their society was built on discipline and austerity, with a military upbringing that turned boys into warriors from the tender age of 7. It's like boot camp, but with even less room for backtalk. Economically, Sparta was less about wealth and more about survival. They relied on a system of helots, essentially serfs tied to the land, to do the farming while they focused on training for war. The helots vastly outnumbered the Spartans, which meant the Spartans had to use both fear and force to keep them in line. It was a tense situation, like living with a roommate who's always on the verge of a meltdown. Now, onto the philosophers, those wise sages of Greece who, in popular imagination, lounged around pondering the meaning of life. The reality was less idyllic. Take Socrates, for example. He was more of a street philosopher, engaging people in debates that were as likely to provoke irritation as insight. His method of questioning was akin to a relentless game of 20 questions, designed to expose the ignorance of his interlocutors. This didn't win him many friends in high places, and in the end, his philosophical pursuits earned him a one-way ticket to a trial and an infamous cup of hemlock. Plato, Socrates' most famous student, had his own academy, a sort of ancient think tank where ideas were dissected with the precision of a surgical scalpel. But life, there wasn't all deep discussions and intellectual marathons. Philosophers had to eat, and running such an academy required funds. Plato, ever the pragmatist, owned some land, which he used to sustain his scholarly pursuits. It was a balancing act of high ideals and the mundane realities of maintaining a roof over one's head. Aristotle, the brainy polymath who followed, had none of Plato's aristocratic detachment. A tutor to Alexander the Great, Aristotle's career was a testament to the importance of networking, proof that knowing the right people can open doors, even in antiquity. He was a prolific writer, and his works covered everything from politics to biology, though not without controversy. Aristotle's views on certain subjects, like his endorsement of slavery as a natural order, remind us that even the wisest can be products of their time, with ideas that don't age well. But let's not leave out the economic side of Greek life entirely. The Greeks were savvy traders, their city-states bustling hubs of commerce. The Athenian agora was the ancient equivalent of Wall Street, a cacophony of deals and exchanges where merchants bartered everything from olive oil to pottery. The economy was a complex tapestry, with trade routes stretching as far as the Black Sea and Egypt. Still, it was an economy susceptible to the vagaries of politics and war, as the Peloponnesian War painfully demonstrated. This conflict between Athens and Sparta tore through the Greek world, leaving a trail of economic ruin and political upheaval. In the end, the Greeks were architects of ideas and society, their triumphs and failures echoing through the ages. They laid the groundwork for Western civilization, but not without tripping over their own ambitious blueprints. As we explore further, we'll see how their legacy, both flawed and fantastic, continues to shape our world. But for now, let's leave the philosophers to their musings and the city-states to their rivalries, as we prepare to dive deeper into the next chapter of this historical odyssey. Let's leave the philosophers to their musings and the city-states to their rivalries, as we hop over to the Far East, where ancient China was busy redefining the art of building big and thinking bigger. You've heard of the Great Wall, right? That colossal serpentine structure stretching over 13,000 miles, enough to wrap around the moon if you're into that kind of thing. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of noble defense against marauding hordes. The Great Wall was as much about keeping in as it was about keeping out, a symbol of imperial hubris and control as much as a defensive masterpiece. Kicking off with a bit of background, the wall wasn't the brainchild of one maniacal emperor with a penchant for bricks. Instead, it was the result of centuries of toil, with each dynasty adding its own twist to the architectural saga. The Qin dynasty, under Emperor Qin Shi Huang, was the first to unite these scattered walls around 221 BCE. But before you imagine him as the ancient Barb the Builder, let's be clear. This project had a body count. Thousands of laborers, many of whom were conscripted peasants and prisoners, labored under brutal conditions. Think of it as an ancient infrastructure project with a dark side, where the cost wasn't just measured in currency, but in human lives. Speaking of Qin Shi Huang, he wasn't exactly the poster child for benevolent leadership. He's the guy who unified China, standardized everything from the currency to the axle lengths of carts, and gave the world its first taste of a centralized bureaucracy. But he also had a bit of a book-burning habit, famously torching texts and burying scholars alive to keep his version of history untarnished. It's the kind of PR campaign that makes you wonder if he was compensating for something. Yet, his legacy of centralization laid the groundwork for a unified China, a feat that would echo through the ages. Now, let's fast forward to the Han Dynasty, where things get economically juicy. The Silk Road, which sounds like the name of an indie band, was in fact the ancient superhighway of trade, connecting China to the Roman Empire and everything in between. This wasn't just about silk, though that was a hot commodity, but included spices, precious metals, and even ideas. The Han government, savvy to the core, knew the value of a good trade route and threw their weight behind it. This was globalization before anyone knew what the term meant. Picture caravans trudging through harsh deserts and treacherous mountains, laden with goods destined for far-off lands. The Silk Road was a bustling artery of commerce, but it was also a vector for cultural exchange. Ideas, religions, and even diseases hitched rides along these routes, shaping the civilizations they touched. Buddhism, for instance, made its way into China via this route, forever altering its religious landscape. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Silk Road wasn't all cumbear and cultural hugs. It was fraught with bandits, corrupt officials, and the ever-present threat of geopolitical instability. Maintaining these trade routes was no small feat and required a delicate balance of diplomacy, military might, and sheer willpower. The Han Dynasty understood this and implemented a well-oiled bureaucratic machine to keep things running smoothly most of the time. Ah, bureaucracy, China's true ancient marvel. The Han administrators were like the original Excel spreadsheets, methodically cataloging everything from grain supplies to population data. They implemented a merit-based system for civil service, a revolutionary idea at the time, designed to ensure that the most capable individuals were at the helm of governance. Of course, the reality didn't always match the ideal, and corruption was as much a part of the system as the mandarin's flowing robes. But when it worked, it was a marvel of efficiency that kept the empire humming. As we weave through these dynasties, let's pause on the Tang Dynasty, often hailed as China's Golden Age. This was a period of relative peace and prosperity, marked by cultural flowering and economic stability. If the Han Dynasty was about laying the groundwork, the Tang was about reaping the rewards. The capital, Chang'an was a cosmopolitan hub, a melting pot of cultures and ideas. It's said that over 1 million people lived within its walls, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Imagine the logistical headache of managing such a metropolis without Google Maps or Uber Eats. Yet, like all great empires, the Tang had its moments of spectacular folly. Take the An Lushan Rebellion, a debacle in the mid-8th century that nearly toppled the dynasty. The rebellion was as much about political ambition as it was about ethnic tensions and economic grievances. When the dust finally settled, millions were dead, and the dynasty was irrevocably weakened. It's a stark reminder that even in periods of greatness, the seeds of downfall are often sown. Now, a word about myth-busting. The Great Wall wasn't visible from space, no matter how many travel brochures claim otherwise, nor was it an impenetrable fortress. Mongol invaders breached it in the 13th century under the leadership of Kublai Khan, proving that even the mightiest defenses have their Achilles heel. And while the Silk Road conjures images of bustling trade and exotic goods, it's worth remembering that for many merchants, it was a perilous gamble, a route fraught with uncertainty where fortunes could be made or lost in the blink of an eye. So, what's the takeaway from this Eastern Odyssey? It's a tale of ambition and innovation, of emperors who dreamed big and sometimes fell spectacularly short. It's a story of how trade routes can connect worlds and how bureaucracies, for all their red tape, can hold an empire together. And most importantly, it's a reminder that history is never just black and white. It's a tapestry of human endeavor, as colorful and complex as the silks that once traversed those ancient roads. As we continue our journey, keep in mind that the story of ancient China is one of both grandeur and grit, a civilization that, despite its challenges and contradictions, laid down the cultural and economic foundations that would influence not just its own future, but the world's. So stay tuned, because the road ahead is full of twists and turns, much like the winding paths of history itself. As we navigate through the winding paths of history, it's time to connect the dots and draw some lessons from our tour of ancient civilizations. If you've ever been fascinated by a civilization's rise and fall, you're in good company. Ancient history is essentially the ultimate binge-worthy drama series, complete with plot twists and cliffhangers. But beneath the grand narratives lies a tapestry of economic blunders, political missteps, and societal upheavals that offer more than just entertainment. Let's start with the Romans, our toga-clad friends who, despite their engineering prowess and military might, managed to forget that overconfidence is rarely a substitute for sound strategy. Their economy, a bustling marketplace of 70 million people at its peak, was a marvel of its time, but also a hotbed of inflation thanks to their casual currency debasement. Rome's political scene was a real-life soap opera, with emperors dropping like flies in a game of throne-style free-for-all. Lesson number 1. A stable currency and political continuity are not just nice-to-haves, they're essential for longevity. Rome's implosion reminds us that even the mightiest empires can crumble under their own weight, a lesson as relevant today as it was centuries ago. Then there's Egypt, with its pharaohs who were the original masters of brand management. They built pyramids and monuments that shouted their divine right to rule, but behind the grandeur lay a society that knew how to play the economic game. Their use of grain as currency and their nimble handling of the Nile's gifts show that sustainability wasn't just a buzzword, it was a necessity. Yet even the mightiest pyramids couldn't shield them from internal strife and external pressures. The takeaway here: economic innovation and resource management are key, but so is maintaining social harmony. On to Greece, where democracy was both a revolutionary concept and a chaotic experiment. Athens' direct democracy was like the world's most ambitious group chat, where everyone had an opinion, but not everyone had a say. Meanwhile, Sparta's minimalist lifestyle, focusing on military might and societal discipline, shows that different paths can lead to greatness or disaster. The Greeks taught us that while philosophical ideas can change the world, economic instability and endless wars can just as easily unravel it. And let's not forget ancient China, with its Great Wall and Silk Road, symbols of both imperial ambition and global connectivity. The Wall, a testament to human endurance and folly, and the Silk Road, the ancient web of globalization, illustrate the dual nature of progress. China's dynasties were masters of administration and trade, but they also had their share of rebellions and power struggles. The lesson here is multifaceted. Balance is key, whether it's between innovation and tradition or between control and chaos. The Silk Road's legacy of cultural exchange reminds us that openness can be as powerful as any wall. So, what do these ancient tales tell us about today? First, that history is never just a series of isolated events. It's a complex web of interconnected actions, decisions, and consequences. Economic mismanagement, political instability, and societal unrest are not new phenomena. They're as old as civilization itself. Each time a civilization ignored these factors, it paid the price. Second, the stories of Rome, Egypt, Greece, and China remind us of the importance of adaptability. Whether it's dealing with inflation, managing resources, or navigating political storms, the ability to adapt can mean the difference between survival and collapse. These civilizations thrived when they innovated and adapted, but faltered when they became complacent or overextended. Lastly, perhaps the most enduring lesson is that while history doesn't repeat itself, it certainly rhymes. The echoes of ancient empires can be heard in today's challenges, a reminder that the past holds valuable insights for those willing to listen. As we grapple with our own economic and political challenges, these ancient stories are more than just cautionary tales. They are blueprints for navigating the complexities of the modern world. So, as you drift off with these ancient lessons echoing in your mind, remember, the past is a tapestry rich with human endeavor, where the threads of ambition, folly, and resilience weave a narrative as timeless as it is instructive. May these stories not only entertain, but also enlighten, reminding us that while empires may rise and fall, the human spirit and its capacity to learn and adapt endure. And on that note, sleep well, knowing that even if history doesn't offer us a crystal ball, it certainly provides a well-thumbed roadmap. The dawn of ancient history is less about grandiose legends and more about scrappy beginnings. Let's cut through the romantic mist that often surrounds these times and dive into the nitty-gritty details. Forget the pristine, mythical landscapes that textbooks sometimes dream up. Think more along the lines of a startup company working out of a dingy garage. Ancient Mesopotamia, often dubbed the cradle of civilization, wasn't exactly the Garden of Eden. It was more like the garage of humble beginnings. First off, let's get our geographical bearings straight. Mesopotamia, for those who might have dozed through geography class, is the region wedged between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which today would be smack in the heart of Iraq. This area was basically the prime real estate of its time, with fertile land perfect for agriculture. But before you think of lush, idyllic fields, remember that this fertility came at a cost. Flooding was as routine as your morning coffee, and not the gentle, picturesque kind. We're talking about the kind that has you scrambling up a tree, clutching onto your last loaf of bread. Now, about that infamous Garden of Eden myth. The idea of Mesopotamia as a paradise is laughable when you consider the day-to-day grind. Sure, they had some of the earliest forms of riding, the first wheels, and some nifty irrigation systems, but before you start romanticizing their ingenuity, think about the back-breaking labor those innovations required. Creating a canal with a basic shovel makes modern-day chores look like a cakewalk. The typical Mesopotamian farmer wasn't lounging around in bliss. He was probably knee-deep in mud and cursing the latest crop-devouring flood. Economics played a key role in shaping these civilizations. The region's prosperity, or lack thereof, was heavily tied to agriculture. Forget Wall Street. In Mesopotamia, the market lived and died with the harvest. A bumper crop could mean prosperity, while a bad season could lead to starvation or even collapse. This economic seesaw was the reality behind the myth of abundance. Now, speaking of myths, let's debunk a few. The Sumerians, Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians weren't sitting around in togas, sipping wine and philosophizing. Theirs was a world of constant survival. The grand ziggurats, those impressive step pyramids, were less about architectural flair and more about showing off who had the biggest, most intimidating pile of bricks. It was ancient civilization's version of keeping up with the Joneses, where the Joneses were warlike rulers with a penchant for expanding their empires. The political landscape was a hotbed of tension. City-states like Uruk, and Babylon were constantly jockeying for power, each trying to outdo the other in terms of territory, wealth, and temples. This wasn't the peaceful coexistence that the myth of a harmonious ancient world might suggest. Instead, it was more like a high-stakes game of Monopoly where everyone's cheating. And don't let the epic tales of gods fool you into thinking life was all divine intervention and celestial support. In reality, religion was as much a tool of control as it was a source of comfort. Those awe-inspiring myths about Gilgamesh and the pantheon of gods were often less about spiritual inspiration and more about keeping the population in line. Priests, after all, were some of the most powerful figures, wielding influence that would make today's politicians envious. Let's not overlook the economic ingenuity that evolved out of necessity. Merchants in Mesopotamia were the original hustlers, trading barley and wool like ancient stockbrokers. They didn't have the luxury of modern currency. Instead, they used silver rings and grains as money, which sounds cute until you realize the logistical nightmare of trying to store and transport your life savings in barley. In this ancient world, the distance between cities like Uruk and about 150 miles, was a journey fraught with peril, not a casual road trip. These trips were the equivalent of sending a satellite into space, requiring meticulous planning and a healthy dose of luck to avoid bandits or hostile neighbors. So while the legends paint a picture of divine perfection, the reality was a gritty, often harsh existence. Ancient Mesopotamia was a world of innovation born of necessity, survival masked as prosperity, and myths spun from mundane realities. But isn't that the beauty of history? The truth, with all its dust and grit, is far more fascinating than the polished tales we often hear. History, after all, is written by the survivors, not the dreamers. If ancient Mesopotamia was a garage startup, then ancient Egypt was the Silicon Valley of its time. But let's not get carried away with visions of sunlit pyramids and pharaohs lounging in golden splendor. The reality. Pharaohs were the original influencers, but instead of Instagram posts, they had stone inscriptions, and their version of going viral involved colossal monuments reaching for the heavens. Let's dive into the economic engine behind those iconic pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was the ancient equivalent of a megaproject. We're talking about 3 million limestone blocks, each weighing in at around 5 tons, give or take your average sports car. And all this without a single hydraulic crane in sight. The manpower was staggering. It's estimated that a workforce of tens of thousands labored for about 20 years to erect just one of these stone behemoths. Slavery, while a popular misconception, wasn't the primary labor source. Instead, these workers were more like seasonal laborers, farmers who clocked in during the Nile's flood season when agriculture was on pause. Paid in bread, beer, and housing, they toiled under the desert sun, proving that even in ancient times, food and drink were potent motivators. Now, before you start imagining these laborers as some kind of Egyptian unionized workforce, let's debunk that myth. Though they were compensated, the conditions were grueling, and the work was anything but voluntary. The pyramids were less about tombs of eternal rest and more about grandiose displays of power and might. Pharaohs were the original CEOs, and these monuments were their annual shareholder reports, etched in stone for eternity. Economically, this pyramid-building frenzy wasn't just a vanity project. It was a massive stimulus for the Egyptian economy. The construction required not only manpower, but a vast supply chain of resources. Quarries, transport networks, and food production all had to be ramped up. It was an ancient version of infrastructure investment, boosting the economy while ensuring the pharaoh's legacy was as rock-solid as the structures themselves. Speaking of legacies, the so-called Golden Age of Egypt wasn't all that it's cracked up to be. Sure, we've heard about periods of stability and prosperity, like the Middle Kingdom's reign, but peel back the shiny veneer, and you'll find a nation constantly on the brink of chaos. The pharaohs may have ruled with an iron fist, but they were only one bad harvest away from turmoil. The Nile, that life-giving artery, was a fickle friend. When the annual inundation was too low, it spelled disaster, a stark reminder that even the mightiest rulers are at the mercy of Mother Nature. The political machinations were equally complex. Pharaohs might have seemed like divine rulers, but in reality they were master politicians. Marriages were strategic alliances, and royal propaganda was as critical as the pyramids themselves. Take Ramses Roman II, the original spin doctor. After a less-than-stellar outcome at the Battle of Kadesh, he went home and declared victory, carving his version of events into temple walls. Who needs facts when you have hieroglyphs? And let's not forget the bureaucrats, the unsung heroes and occasional villains of Egyptian history. The vizier was the real power behind the throne, running the day-to-day affairs, while the pharaoh played the guard king. This was an empire built on a foundation of paperwork, with scribes acting as the data analysts of their day, recording everything from grain totals to tax collections. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, proving that bureaucracy is as old as civilization itself. But let's return to those towering pyramids. Beyond being massive projects of stone and sweat, they were also a testament to the Egyptian belief in the afterlife, a belief so strong that it justified the immense resources poured into these monumental structures. The pyramids were not just tombs. They were the ultimate insurance policy for eternity, built to ensure that the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife was first class all the way. As we wrap up this glimpse into ancient Egyptian life, remember that the allure of golden desert sands and mighty rulers is only one side of the story. Behind the grandeur was an empire fueled by human effort, economic necessity, and political savvy. The pharaohs may have worn crowns, but it was the hands of many that lifted them to their lofty heights. So, the next time you marvel at the pyramids, remember they are as much about human tenacity as they are about divine ambition. Stay tuned for more tales from the sands of time. There's plenty more to uncover. Speaking of monumental human tenacity, let's shift our gaze to ancient Greece, specifically Athens, where democracy was born. Or, as some might argue, where democracy was conceived with a fair bit of creative license. You see, Athens' democracy was more like a VIP club, exclusive and selective. It was hardly the open house of freedom and equality we often imagine. If anything, the Athenians mastered the art of fake it till you make it, turning democracy into a theatrical production where only the leading men got to play. Here's where it gets interesting. Only about 10-20% of the population could actually vote. That's right, in a city bustling with around 300,000 souls, only about 30,000 were considered citizens. And who made the cut? 3 adult males with Athenian parentage. Women, slaves, and foreigners, basically the rest of the population, were benched in this democratic experiment. So much for government by the people. Now, you might be wondering how this elite group managed to build something as grand as the Parthenon. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just their love for democracy that financed this architectural wonder. Enter the Delian League, a coalition of city-states originally formed to fend off Persian invasions. Athens, however, played the part of the overzealous treasurer, collecting tribute from its allies and stashing it away like a squirrel hoarding nuts. The League's coffers quickly transformed into Athens' personal piggy bank, funding not just their military endeavors, but also their ambitious architectural projects. The Parthenon, with its gleaming marble and intricate sculptures, was more than a temple to Athena. It was a colossal billboard of Athenian supremacy, built from the wealth of its allies. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a modern metropolis erecting a skyscraper with funds siphoned from its smaller neighbors. Not exactly the democratic spirit, is it? But let's talk about those warships, triremes to be precise. These sleek, speedy vessels were the real muscle behind Athenian power. With 170 rowers stacked like sardines on 3 levels, these ships were the Formula One cars of the ancient seas, maneuvering with precision and speed. And who manned these maritime marvels? Not the wealthy elite, but the thetes, Athens' lowest class of free men. This is where democracy got an unexpected boost. The naval prowess of Athens relied on the very people who had the most to gain from a more inclusive political system. Their role in defending the state gave them leverage, helping to gradually expand political rights, an ironic twist in the tale of Greek democracy. Economically, these warships were a huge investment. Each trireme cost about a talent of silver to build, equivalent to the annual income of a skilled worker. Maintaining them was another story, requiring constant funding for repairs, crew wages, and supplies. But the investment paid off in spades, as Athens controlled the trade routes and collected tribute, boosting its coffers and its influence. Yet this maritime dominance was a double-edged sword. It meant Athens had to keep flexing its naval muscles, constantly patrolling the Aegean like an overzealous hall monitor. Any sign of weakness could invite rebellion among its allies, or worse, invite the Persians back into the fray. This wasn't just a democracy. It was a democracy with a side of imperialism, where the threat of force kept the tribute flowing and the Parthenon shining. The social dynamics of Athens were equally complex. While democracy was touted as a cornerstone of Athenian identity, the reality was a society stratified by class and gender. Women were relegated to the domestic sphere, their roles largely confined to managing the household and producing heirs. Meanwhile, slaves formed the backbone of the economy, working in everything from mining to domestic service. This was a city built on the labor of those who had no voice in its so-called democratic processes. And then there were the medics, foreigners who lived in Athens, contributed to its economy, but were denied citizenship rights. They were the immigrants who kept the wheels of commerce turning, paying taxes and serving in the military, yet forever on the outside looking in. Their presence was a reminder that Athenian democracy, for all its lofty ideals, was selective in its inclusivity. Politically, Athens was a hotbed of intrigue and debate. The assembly, where citizens gathered to discuss and vote on matters of state, was both a symbol of democratic engagement and a stage for political theater. Decisions were often swayed by skilled orators who could turn a phrase as deftly as they could wield a sword. Figures like Pericles used their rhetorical prowess to steer public opinion, proving that in the realm of politics, words could be as powerful as weapons. Pericles himself was a master of political spin, overseeing the construction of the Parthenon while expanding Athenian influence. Under his leadership, Athens thrived, but it also sowed the seeds of its own downfall. The Peloponnesian War loomed on the horizon, a conflict born from the tensions and rivalries that Athenian dominance had stoked. As we leave Athens for now, remember that its democracy was both groundbreaking and flawed, a tapestry woven with threads of power, privilege, and ambition. It was a society that, despite its imperfections, laid the groundwork for democratic ideals that would echo through the ages. But hold that thought, because our journey through ancient history is far from over. We've only just begun to unravel the tapestry of human civilization, and there are many more threads to pull. Stay tuned as we explore more tales from the ancient world, where legends and reality intertwine in the most fascinating ways. We've only just begun to unravel the tapestry of human civilization, and there are many more threads to pull. As we leave behind the democratic experiments of Athens, let's hop across the Mediterranean to a place where democracy was less of a hot topic and more of a distant memory. Rome. Ah, Rome, the empire that supposedly wasn't built in a day, and honestly, thank the gods for that. With a colossal empire spanning across Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia, Rome wasn't just a city. It was a logistical masterpiece wrapped in marble and ambition. First off, let's talk about those famous Roman roads. You know, the ones that allegedly all lead to Rome. Well, they didn't build themselves. These roads were the empire's circulatory system, stretching over 250,000 miles, with about 50,000 miles paved. That's like laying down a highway from Earth to the Moon and back, with enough left over to circle the globe twice. And just like a modern-day infrastructure bill, these projects weren't cheap. Constructing a Roman road could cost up to 1 million sesterces per mile. Talk about a hefty price for a smooth ride. But why were these roads so crucial? Simple. In an empire where size mattered more than a Herculean bicep, swift movement of armies and goods was the ultimate flex. Rome's military machine relied on these stone arteries to squash rebellions and enforce their will, while merchants used them to trade everything from olive oil to exotic spices. It's a classic case of build it, and they will come, but with more marching legions and fewer baseball metaphors. Of course, roads weren't the only infrastructure trick up Rome's sleeve. Enter the aqueducts, those engineering marvels that turned arid landscapes into fertile ground. By the 1st century AD, Rome boasted 11 aqueducts stretching over 300 miles, delivering fresh water to its citizens. This wasn't just about quenching thirst. It was a public health initiative, an urban planning revolution, and a political statement all rolled into one. Clean water meant fewer diseases, happier citizens, and more time for the Romans to indulge in their favorite pastime, watching gladiators duke it out in the Colosseum. Ah, the Colosseum. If Hollywood's taught us anything, it's that gladiators were the rock stars of ancient Rome, and the Colosseum was their amphitheater. But before you picture Russell Crowe going all Maximus, let's get real about the economics of blood sport. The Colosseum, completed in 80 AD, could seat around 50,000 spectators, making it the Super Bowl of its time. Admission was typically free, but don't be fooled. These games were as much about political propaganda as they were entertainment. Emperors used them to curry favor with the masses, distracting from any political snafus with a healthy dose of bread and circuses. And speaking of bread, let's not forget the economic engine that kept Rome's heart beating: agriculture. With a population of over 1 million, the city required a staggering amount of food. Enter the Annona, Rome's grain dole, a welfare system that distributed free or subsidized grain to citizens. This wasn't just a goodwill gesture. It was a strategic maneuver to keep the urban poor from rioting, keep the stomachs full and the populace less likely to revolt, an age-old tactic that even modern politicians might envy. But all this grandeur came at a price. Rome's expansionist policies, while initially lucrative, eventually stretched its resources thin. The costs of maintaining legions across vast territories, coupled with the logistics of supplying far-flung provinces, became a financial quagmire. The empire's wealth, much like a social media influencer's follow account, was often more about appearances than reality. And let's not sugarcoat the slave economy that underpinned much of Rome's prosperity. Slaves were the backbone of Roman labor, working in everything from domestic service to agriculture to construction. It's estimated that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Italy's population were slaves. This wasn't just a moral failing. It was an economic time bomb. The reliance on slave labor stifled innovation, as why invest in new technology when human labor was so cheap? Furthermore, the constant demand for slaves fueled expansionist wars, creating a vicious cycle of conquest and dependency. Politically, Rome was a cocktail of intrigue, betrayal, and power struggles. The Senate, once the cradle of Roman governance, became a stage for ambitious generals and power-hungry politicians. Figures like Julius Caesar, who famously crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, played the political game with lethal precision. His assassination on the Ides of March in 44 BC wasn't just a plot twist worthy of Shakespeare, but a stark reminder that in Rome, power was as perilous as it was coveted. Economically, the empire's currency, denarii, was the lifeblood of trade. But rampant inflation, driven by over-reliance on military conquest and a devaluation of coinage, was the ghost at the banquet. By the 3rd century AD, Rome faced a financial crisis that no amount of gladiatorial games could distract from. The empire, once a symbol of unyielding strength, was showing cracks in its marble facade. Yet, despite these challenges, Rome's enduring legacy is undeniable. Its roads, laws, and architecture laid the foundations for modern civilization. The Pax Romana, a period of relative peace lasting over 200 years, allowed for unprecedented cultural and economic growth. But like all great dramas, the Roman Empire's story is one of triumph and tragedy, ambition and hubris, a cautionary tale of what happens when expansion becomes an obsession. As we pause our journey through the annals of Rome, remember that history is a mosaic of human ambition and folly. The empire's rise and fall offer lessons still relevant today, a testament to the complexities and contradictions of power. So stay tuned, because our exploration of ancient history is far from over. There's a whole world of stories waiting to be uncovered, with Rome's colossal shadow as a backdrop. And as Rome's imposing shadow looms behind us, let's take a moment to appreciate the broader strokes of ancient history. We've journeyed through Mesopotamian mud, Egyptian sands, Athenian debates, and Roman roads, each step revealing that the past is less a series of isolated stories and more a tangled web of influences that still tug at the strings of our modern world. First up, let's talk allure. The romanticism of ancient civilizations is like an irresistible siren call, luring us with tales of pyramids, philosophers, and gladiators. But let's face it, the reality was often less glamorous and more grueling. Take the Egyptian pyramids, for instance. They're not just architectural marvels. They're monumental testaments to human perseverance and the sheer willingness to move a few million tons of rock under the relentless sun. The appeal lies in their grandeur, but the truth is rooted in blood, sweat, and a heck of a lot of bread and beer. Then there's democracy, that old Athenian chestnut. We love to celebrate it as the cradle of freedom, yet it was more like an exclusive club with a rather strict dress code. Only a sliver of society got to play the democratic game, while the rest watched from the sidelines. It's a reminder that even our most cherished ideals have complicated beginnings, often built on the backs of those without a voice. Rome, the grand stage of imperial drama, leaves us with a legacy of roads, laws, and lessons in overreach. The Romans mastered the art of governance and infrastructure, but their downfall was as much about economic overextension and political chaos as it was about barbarian invasions. The myth of Rome as an unshakable colossus crumbles under the weight of its own contradictions, a mighty empire reduced to a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked. Now, why do we keep falling for these myths? Perhaps it's because they offer a version of history that feels neat and digestible, a narrative where heroes conquer and ideals triumph. But history isn't a tidy storybook. It's a sprawling epic, filled with flawed characters and unintended consequences. The allure of romanticism offers comfort, a way to view the past through rose-tinted glasses, but it often glosses over the gritty truths, the economic woes, the social injustices, the political machinations. Take the economic practices of ancient times, for example. The barter systems, the rise of currency, the trade networks that spanned continents. These weren't just the backdrop to grand historical narratives. They were the engines driving them. Mesopotamian merchants hustling barley, Egyptian pharaohs financing pyramids with grain and labor, Athenian naval dominance funded by allied tributes. These economic realities shaped the destinies of civilizations. The legacies of these practices echo in today's global markets, where trade and resource management remain central to prosperity and power. Politically, the strategies of the ancients offer lessons in both leadership and folly. The balance of power, the art of diplomacy, the exercise of control, these were as relevant then as they are now. Rulers like Ramses Roman II and Julius Caesar were masters of spin long before the term public relations was coined. They understood that perception could be as powerful as reality, crafting narratives to bolster their reigns. Modern politics, with its media manipulations and image-conscious leaders, owes much to these ancient pioneers of propaganda. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through ancient history, let's not forget that the past is a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. The stories of yesteryear are not just dusty relics, but living lessons, cautionary tales, and inspirations. They remind us that while we may dream of grand empires and noble democracies, the truth is often messier, a blend of ambition, resilience, and yes, a fair share of hubris. In the end, the allure of ancient history lies in its duality, the romance of legends and the reality of grit. It's a journey that challenges us to look beyond the myths and see the humanity beneath. As we stand on the shoulders of those who came before, let's embrace the lessons of the past while forging our own path forward. After all, history is not just about where we've been, but where we're going. And in that journey, the echoes of ancient wisdom continue to guide us, reminding us that while empires may rise and fall, the human spirit endures. In the beginning, there was Mesopotamia, and it was anything but simple. This wasn't just the land between two rivers. It was where civilization decided to roll up its sleeves and get to work. Picture the Tigris and Euphrates as the original power couple of geography, setting the stage for humanity to start wandering and start building. Now, don't get too starry-eyed. We're not talking about some peaceful Eden. No, this was a place where people had to be as tough as the clay tablets they invented. Speaking of clay tablets, let's chat about writing. If you've ever struggled to make sense of someone's handwriting, spare a thought for the poor souls deciphering cuneiform. Around 200 BCE, the Sumerians decided that scratching wedge-shaped marks into wet clay was a good way to keep tabs on barley transactions and temple donations. This wasn't some artsy endeavor. It was accountancy, the original spreadsheets, if you will. And while this might not sound glamorous, it was revolutionary. Writing allowed them to keep records, tell stories, and most importantly, prove that someone owed you a goat. Now, let's talk cities. Uruk, which sounds a bit like someone clearing their throat, was one of the world's first. By around 100 BCE, it was a bustling metropolis with a population of about 50,000, which may not rival today's megacities. But in ancient terms, it was the Big Apple. If you think urban planning is a modern headache, these folks were dealing with issues like sewage and water supply without the benefit of modern engineering. They had to figure out how to keep drinking water clean while living between two rivers that were as prone to flooding as a teenager's emotions. But wait, there's more. These early cities didn't just pop up because people liked living in close quarters. This was about economics and power. You see, land between two rivers meant fertile soil, and fertile soil meant food surpluses. And food surpluses meant people could specialize in something other than farming, which is how we ended up with jobs like priest, craftsman, and bureaucrat. It's also where the idea of taxation sneaked into the picture. After all, someone had to pay for those ziggurats, massive stepped pyramids that served as temples and probably the original skyscrapers. What about the rulers? The kings and godlike figures. They weren't just sitting on thrones looking majestic. They were savvy politicians. Take Gilgamesh, the semi-mythical king of Uruk, who was said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 human. His epic tale would have you believe he was a heroic figure, but let's be real. His story is more about power struggles and midlife crises than divine destiny. These rulers had to navigate alliances, wars, and the occasional uprising. It was a tough gig, and the guards weren't always on speed dial to help out. And then there's Hammurabi, the Babylonian king best known for his code. Around 1754 BCE, he decided that laws needed to be etched in stone. Literally, the Code of Hammurabi is one of the earliest and most comprehensive legal documents we have, with 282 laws covering everything from theft to divorce. But before you think of him as the original justice warrior, remember that some of these laws were harsh enough to make you wince. An eye for an eye wasn't just a metaphor, it was policy. And while it sounds brutal, it was also an attempt to bring order to a society that was growing increasingly complex. Beneath the grand narratives of kings and cities, the daily grind was anything but glamorous. Most people were farmers or laborers, and life was a constant balance of hard work and survival. Forget about weekends. The ancient Mesopotamians didn't even have a concept of a 7-day week until later. If you were a farmer, the success of your crops depended on the whims of the rivers and the weather. No pressure, right? Economically, this was a society constantly juggling resources. Barley was currency, and silver was for the elite. Trade wasn't just for exotic goods, it was essential for survival. Mesopotamians swapped grain and textiles for timber from Lebanon and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. This wasn't just about luxury, it was about necessity. The region might have been fertile, but it was also resource-poor in many ways, so trade routes were as critical as the rivers themselves. Socially, the structure was as layered as a lasagna. At the top were the priests and rulers, followed by craftsmen, merchants, and finally, the farmers and slaves. In a world where the gods supposedly had a hand in everything, the priests wielded enormous power, acting as intermediaries between the divine and the dirt-covered masses. And if you're thinking that sounds like a cushy job, remember they also had to keep the gods happy, which in a polytheistic society meant a lot of guesswork and ritual. So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, Mesopotamia wasn't just the cradle of civilization. It was the testing ground for everything from government to legal systems to urban planning. The legacy of these ancient innovators is still felt today, whether it's in the laws we follow, the cities we live in, or the fact that we can jot down a grocery list, even if it's on our phones rather than clay. It's a reminder that civilization, with all its messiness and marvels, is a lot older and more resilient than we often give it credit for. As we wrap up this glimpse into Mesopotamia, let's tip our hats, or whatever headgear is appropriate, to those ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians who paved the way. They may not have had the internet, but they were definitely online with their own ingenious ways of solving life's challenges. Stay tuned, because the past has plenty more stories to tell, and if history is anything to go by, they'll be as complex and captivating as ever. Speaking of stories with a scope as wide as the sky, let's make a sharp pivot from Mesopotamia to the sandy expanses of ancient Egypt. Egypt, the land of pharaohs, pyramids, and enough mysterious allure to keep conspiracy theorists busy for centuries. But before you start picturing Cleopatra lounging in a golden palace, or Ramses Roman II flexing his divine muscles, let's peel back the pyramid-shaped curtain and delve into the reality behind those postcard-perfect images. First off, let's tackle those pyramids, the ultimate statement piece, if ever there was one. Forget the idea of alien architects or mystical energy channels. These were the work of thousands of human hands. Built primarily during the Old Kingdom period, around 600 to 100 BCE, the pyramids were a combination of human ingenuity, back-breaking labor, and a dash of divine delusion. The most famous of these, the Great Pyramid of Giza, was commissioned by Pharaoh Khufu around 560 BCE and originally stood at a towering 146 meters, which lost a few meters over the millennia. It was the tallest human-made structure in the world for over 800 years, finally dethroned by the Lincoln Cathedral in England. Talk about a long reign. But let's not get too swept away by the grandeur. Building these behemoths wasn't just a matter of declaring, "Let there be stone," and voila, a pyramid. Nope, this was a colossal feat of logistics, labor, and economics. It's estimated that around 20,000 to 30,000 workers, some argue even more, labored seasonally to bring Khufu's vision to life. And they weren't slaves, despite the popular myth. Many were skilled laborers, farmers recruited during the annual Nile flooding when their fields were underwater. You could say it was a form of ancient job diversification, one season plowing fields, the next hauling limestone blocks. And speaking of stone, let's talk numbers. The Great Pyramid consists of about 3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 5 to 15 tons. That's like moving a small herd of elephants one stone at a time. And these weren't just any stones. They were carefully quarried and transported from various sites, including Tura for the smooth outer casing and Aswan for the hefty granite blocks used in the inner chambers. It's a logistical nightmare that makes modern supply chain issues look like a walk in the park. Now, how did they fund such monumental projects? It wasn't through crowdfunding or bake sales, that's for sure. Ancient Egypt's economy was a mix of barter and state-controlled resource allocation. The state collected taxes in the form of grain, livestock, and labor, which were then redistributed to support construction projects. It was a well-oiled machine, or as well-oiled as a system can be when you're relying on river floods and manual labor. The economy also thrived on trade. Egypt's location was perfect for connecting with the rest of Africa, the Middle East, and beyond, swapping gold, papyrus, and grain for cedar from Lebanon, ebony and ivory from Nubia, and lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Socially, there was a hierarchy as rigid as a pyramid's geometry. At the pinnacle was the Pharaoh, considered a living god, a divine intermediary between the gods and the mortals. Below him were the priests and nobles, who played critical roles in the spiritual and administrative affairs of the state. Then came the scribes, craftsmen, and traders, followed by the farmers and laborers, the backbone of the society. And at the bottom, the slaves, often prisoners of war, who were the ancient equivalent of the cheap labor force. But here's the kicker. Despite the rigid social structure, there was room for social mobility. Skilled workers could rise through the ranks, and literacy was a ticket to upward mobility. Scribes, in particular, were highly valued, their ability to read and write offering them a status akin to today's tech gurus. They were the ones who could immortalize the pharaoh's exploits on temple walls or keep meticulous records of grain stores and taxes. And speaking of immortality, let's not forget about the afterlife, a concept that drove much of Egyptian life and labor. The pyramids weren't just grand tombstones. They were designed as gateways to the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that life after death was akin to a continuation of the earthly one, provided you had the right amenities. Hence, pharaohs were buried with everything from chariots to jars of beer, ensuring they'd travel in style. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Building pyramids required more than just manpower and resources. It needed political stability. The centralized power of the pharaoh was crucial to maintaining the workforce and resources needed for such projects. When political turmoil struck, as it inevitably did, pyramid building slowed or stopped altogether. The Middle Kingdom saw fewer pyramids and more rock-cut tombs as power decentralized and resources dwindled. So, while the pyramids stand as a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, they're also a reminder of the complex economic and social machinery that made them possible. These structures were more than just monuments to the dead. They were symbols of a thriving, if not occasionally tumultuous, civilization. As we leave the shadows of these ancient giants, there's more to uncover about the rest of this fascinating land. Because if there's one thing history loves, it's a good cliffhanger. Stay tuned, because the story of ancient Egypt is far from over. From the towering pyramids of Egypt, our historical journey now sails across the Mediterranean to the sun-drenched lands of ancient Greece, often hailed as the cradle of democracy and philosophy. Let's set the scene. It's around the 5th century BCE, and Athens is basking in what historians like to call its golden age. But don't let the shining marble and the high-minded rhetoric fool you. This was a society as complex and divided as any reality TV show, complete with power plays, social divides, and the occasional spartiate ready to crash the party. Athens, where democracy was born, not in a manger, mind you, but in the bustling agora, where citizens gathered to argue, vote, and occasionally throw some shade. But before we get too misty-eyed about the birthplace of democratic ideals, let's address the big, uncomfortable truth. This democracy was about as inclusive as a members-only club with a penchant for exclusivity. Of a population of about 250,000, only about 30,000 were considered full citizens. That's a mere 12%, folks. Women, slaves, and non-citizens, known as medics, were left out of the voting frenzy. It's like throwing a massive party, but only letting a fraction of the guests touch the punch bowl. Now, let's talk about those key players in this Athenian drama. First up, Pericles, the statesman who could give any modern-day political spin doctor a run for their money. He led Athens during its golden age, from 461 to 429 BCE, and was the mastermind behind the Parthenon, a temple that still stands as a testament to Greek architectural genius. Under his leadership, Athens became a cultural powerhouse, but let's not gloss over the fact that his policies also led to the costly and ultimately disastrous Peloponnesian War. Pericles may have been a visionary, but he couldn't resist the allure of expanding Athenian influence, a move that would eventually lead to Athens' downfall. Talk about a plot twist. But Pericles wasn't the only star in this political theater. Enter Socrates, the philosopher who made it his mission to challenge the status quo. He wandered the streets of Athens like a philosophical gadfly, questioning everyone from politicians to poets with his trademark method of relentless inquiry. His insistence on seeking truth and virtue was admirable, but it didn't win him any popularity contests. In 399 BCE, he was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and impiety, a fate that demonstrates how even in a society that lauded free speech, stepping on too many toes could land you in hot water, or a cup of hemlock, as it were. Speaking of societal contradictions, let's get into the nitty-gritty of Greek democracy's dark underbelly. The Athenians loved to boast about their enlightened governance, but their economy thrived on the backs of slaves. It's estimated that there were around 100,000 slaves in Athens alone, performing tasks from domestic duties to working in the infamous silver mines of Laurion. These mines were no joke. Conditions were grueling and dangerous, with some slaves working in pitch darkness for hours on end. This was the harsh reality beneath the glossy surface of Athenian prosperity. The economy itself was a curious beast. Athens was a trading hub, thanks to its strategic location and formidable navy. The city imported grain, timber, and metals while exporting olive oil, pottery, and silver. But economic prosperity was a double-edged sword, often leading to social tensions. The wealth gap between the elite and the lower classes was as wide as the Aegean Sea, and political power often remained in the hands of the privileged few. Sound familiar? The more things change, the more they stay the same. Now, before we wrap up, let's touch on those scandals that added spice to the Greek political scene. One of the juiciest involved Alcibiades, a charismatic but controversial figure who could charm his way through any door, political or otherwise. He was a protege of Socrates and possessed an uncanny ability to switch allegiances, shifting from Athenian to Spartan to Persian sides during the Peloponnesian War. His escapades were the stuff of legend, but his betrayal of Athens left a bitter legacy, showing that even the most admired figures could fall from grace with a spectacular thud. As we draw this chapter to a close, let's not forget the philosophical and political legacy that ancient Greece bequeathed to the world. Despite its flaws and contradictions, this was a society that dared to ask big questions and strive for ideals that would echo through the ages. The seeds of democracy, philosophy, and artistic expression that were planted here continue to influence our modern world in ways both profound and subtle. So, as we sail away from the shores of ancient Greece, leaving behind its marble columns and philosophical musings, remember that the past is never truly past. It's a living conversation, a continual dialogue that invites us to reflect on our own societies and the ideals we hold dear. And as history has shown us time and again, the stories of humanity are as tangled and captivating as any epic poem. Stay tuned, because the saga is far from over, and there's plenty more history to unravel. As we bid farewell to the philosophical musings and political theatrics of ancient Greece, let's strap on our sandals and march straight into the heart of the Roman Empire, a realm that at its zenith stretched across 3 continents. Now, if you think Rome's legendary status was carved in marble from day one, think again. This was an empire that rose from the ashes of a republic, built its glory on ambition and innovation, yet couldn't escape the pitfalls of overextension and epic political drama. First off, let's talk architecture, because the Romans knew how to build with style. Take the Colosseum, for instance, a playground for gladiators and the ultimate testament to Roman engineering prowess. Completed in 80 AD under Emperor Titus, this colossal amphitheater could seat around 50,000 spectators. Basically a packed modern football stadium minus the nachos. And while we romanticize the gladiatorial games as the Super Bowl of ancient blood sports, the reality was far grittier. This wasn't just about entertainment. It was propaganda at its finest, with emperors using the games to demonstrate their power and keep the masses entertained. Bread and circuses, anyone. But here's a jaw-dropper for you. The Colosseum wasn't even built with regular funding. It was financed with loot from the sacking of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That's right, Rome's architectural marvel was essentially a war trophy. Talk about turning spoils into spectacles. Speaking of roads, the Romans had a knack for paving the way. Literally, the saying, "all roads lead to Rome," wasn't just poetic, it was logistical genius. At its peak, the Roman road network stretched over 250,000 miles, with 50,000 miles of it paved. These weren't just any roads, they were meticulously constructed, with layers of sand, gravel, and stone, setting the stage for everything from troop movements to trade. But before you start picturing a smooth Sunday drive, remember these roads were more about durability than comfort. You'd be rattling along in a cart, not cruising in a chariot with suspension. Economically, Rome was a juggernaut of trade and taxation. The empire's vast expanse meant a network of trade routes that brought everything from Egyptian grain to British tin right to its doorstep. The Roman denarius was the currency of choice, a silver coin that facilitated trade across borders, embodying Rome's economic might. Yet, this wasn't without its downsides. The further the empire stretched, the more it relied on a complex system of taxation and tribute from conquered lands. And while this influx of resources helped Rome thrive, it also meant that when things went awry, like a bad harvest or a rebellious province, the ripple effects were felt empire-wide. And let's not forget the political circus. The Roman Empire was as much a soap opera as it was a superpower. Emperors like Nero, with his penchant for theatrics and rumored fiddle-playing while Rome burned, to Caligula, whose eccentricities allegedly included making his horse a consul, kept things interesting, to say the least. Political intrigue, assassinations, and power struggles were par for the course. It's a wonder anyone managed to get anything done with all the backstabbing and palace plotting. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that Rome fell solely because of barbarian invasions. Sure, the Visigoths sacking Rome in 410 AD was a significant blow, but the empire's decline was a slow burn fueled by internal decay, economic strain, and military overreach. In simpler terms, Rome bit off more than it could chew. Maintaining control over such a vast territory required immense resources and manpower, and as the empire expanded, cracks inevitably began to show. Think of it as trying to hold a sprawling house party with too few hosts. It's only a matter of time before something breaks. Socially, Rome was a melting pot of cultures, thanks to its expansive conquests. This diversity was a double-edged sword, enriching the empire with new ideas and goods, while also adding layers of complexity to an already intricate social hierarchy. At the top, you had the patricians, Rome's aristocratic elite, who wielded power and influence. Below them were the plebeians, the common folk, who could rise through the ranks but were often at the mercy of the political winds. And let's not gloss over the plight of slaves, who formed the backbone of the Roman economy. By some estimates, slaves made up a third of Rome's population, performing everything from household chores to back-breaking labor in the fields and mines. Despite its flaws, Roman law was a marvel of organization. The 12 Tables, established in the 5th century BC, laid the groundwork for Roman legal systems, and subsequent developments in Roman law would influence legal thinking for centuries. This legal framework helped maintain order across the empire's vast territories, ensuring that Roman citizens, no matter how far-flung, had some semblance of rights and protections. As we stand amid the ruins of Rome, it's tempting to romanticize the grandeur and overlook the gritty reality of an empire that was as much chaos as it was order. The stories of Rome are a testament to human ambition and folly, to the heights of innovation and the depths of excess. But remember, the Roman Empire wasn't built in a day, nor did it fall in one. It was a story of resilience and hubris, of a society that dared to dream big but stumbled under its own weight. As we prepare to journey onward, leaving behind the echoes of gladiatorial cheers and the clatter of chariots on cobblestones, let's keep in mind that the past is never a simple tale. It's a tapestry of triumphs and failures, woven together by the hands of ordinary people living extraordinary times. Stay tuned, because history has more up its sleeve, and the next chapter promises to be just as captivating. As we leave the echoes of Roman ambition behind, it's time to dive into the grand finale of our historical odyssey, the fall of Rome and the birth of the so-called Dark Ages, a title that's as misleading as a fish on a bicycle. You see, Rome didn't fall in one cataclysmic event, like a colossal Jenga tower finally giving way. Nope, it was more of a slow-motion collapse, a gradual unraveling that took centuries, and a cocktail of problems to brew. Let's kick things off with the economic train wreck that was late Rome. The empire's economy was like an overstuffed suitcase, bursting at the seams and ready to pop. Inflation was rampant, and the denarius, once a shiny coin of pure silver, had been reduced to a shadow of its former self, as emperors diluted its silver content to fund military campaigns and public works. Imagine trying to stretch a paycheck made of monopoly money. It's not going to end well. This devaluation, coupled with crippling taxation and a shrinking middle class, meant the empire's financial woes were as colossal as its architectural wonders. And speaking of military campaigns, let's not forget the weight of Rome's military ambitions. By the 3rd century AD, the army had ballooned to around 400,000 soldiers, an expensive insurance policy against the growing threats from outside and within. Maintaining this force required a staggering amount of resources, and when you're juggling this with an economy in freefall, something's got to give. Enter the barbarian invasions, but don't get too swept up in the image of wild-eyed savages at the gates. Many of these so-called barbarians were actually integrated into Roman society long before the empire's final days, serving as allies and even joining the army. It's a bit like hiring the neighborhood kids to mow your lawn, only for them to eventually decide they'd rather own the yard. Politically, Rome was about as stable as a soap opera plot. The empire split in 285 AD under Emperor Diocletian, who decided that one man managing the sprawling territory was akin to herding cats. This division into East and West was supposed to streamline governance, but instead laid the groundwork for competing interests and eventual division. The Western Roman Empire, with Rome as its heart, was like an old car running on fumes, while the Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, was the snazzy new model with a full tank. By 476 AD, the Western Empire had officially crumbled, with the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, dethroned by the Germanic leader Odoacer. And just like that, the curtain fell on one of history's most iconic empires, though the eastern half would chug along for another 1,000 years, proving that sometimes it's all about location, location, location. Now, let's tackle the myth of the Dark Ages, a term that conjures up images of intellectual gloom and cultural stagnation. But hold on to your helmets, because this period wasn't quite the black hole it's often made out to be. Sure, there was the collapse of centralized Roman authority in the West, but this paved the way for new power dynamics and cultural fusions. The so-called Dark Ages were actually a time of transition and transformation, as the remnants of Roman civilization blended with Germanic, Celtic, and other cultures. It was like a historical stew, full of unexpected ingredients and surprising flavors. Economically, the early medieval period saw a shift from the sprawling trade networks of the Roman era to more localized economies. The massive cities that once thrived under Roman rule shrank or disappeared, giving way to smaller towns and rural communities. The feudal system emerged, with its manors and vassals, creating a new kind of economic and social structure. It was a system that worked, albeit imperfectly, for a world where the idea of centralized power was more myth than reality. Socially, there was a reorganization as well. The power vacuum left by Rome's fall led to the rise of local lords and chieftains, who offered protection and stability in exchange for loyalty and service. The church became a unifying force, stepping into the role of spiritual and, sometimes, temporal leader. Monasteries became centers of learning and preservation, copying ancient texts by hand, painstaking work that ensured the survival of knowledge through the dimly lit corridors of time. So, while it was no Renaissance, the medieval era wasn't a cultural wasteland either. And speaking of the Renaissance, the seeds of this rebirth were sown in the so-called Dark Ages, as the remnants of Roman law, philosophy, and architecture intertwined with new influences. The medieval world was a crucible of innovation, laying the groundwork for the intellectual and artistic explosion that would follow. The rediscovery of classical texts, thanks to those diligent monks, would eventually spark a thirst for knowledge and exploration that defined the Renaissance. As we wrap up this journey, let's reflect on Rome's legacy, a civilization that left behind more than just ruins and dusty scrolls. Its influence is woven into the fabric of our modern world, from legal systems to languages, engineering to entertainment. Rome was not just a place. It was an idea, one that continues to captivate and inspire. Its story is a reminder of human ambition and frailty, of the heights we can reach and the pitfalls we might face. So, as you drift off into the embrace of Morpheus, remember that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide to what might be. The echoes of the past are all around us, whispering their stories, if only we take the time to listen. In the grand theater of human history, the Neolithic Revolution was the moment our ancestors stopped chasing their dinner and started inviting it over for a sit-down meal. Around 10,000 BCE, humanity collectively decided that running after wild squirrels with a pointy stick was perhaps not the best long-term strategy. So they put on their thinking caps, made of whatever prehistoric material was handy, and invented agriculture. This shift was the ultimate transformation, the OG glow-up that took us from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled farmers. It's as if they swapped their Stone Age Fitbits for plows and seed drills, trading in cardio for carbs. Now, why did this revolution matter? Well, consider the fact that before agriculture, humans were like the ultimate urban guests, always on the move, never staying long enough to pay rent. But with farming, they could finally put down roots, literally and metaphorically. This was the birth of permanent settlements, the first neighborhoods where everyone knew your name and probably your business too. And the epicenter of this agricultural breakthrough, Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which some ancient PR genius dubbed the cradle of civilization. Mesopotamia was like the Silicon Valley of antiquity, a hotspot of innovation where the soil was fertile, and the opportunities were as abundant as the unpredictable floods that nourished the land. Talk about a place with mood swings. One minute it's a serene riverbank, the next it's a scene from Waterworld. But despite its occasional temper tantrums, Mesopotamia had a lot going for it. The land was rich, the water was plentiful, and the geography was ideal for growing crops. It was like Mother Nature had laid out a buffet and invited all the early humans to dig in. The transition from foraging to farming wasn't just about finding a more reliable food source. It was about changing the very fabric of society. With agriculture, People didn't need to roam vast distances to survive. They could stay put, build homes, and create communities. Suddenly, there was more time for other pursuits, like inventing the wheel or figuring out how to write those early cuneiform texts. The social dynamics shifted, too. Once individuals owned land and resources, wealth and power could be accumulated, setting the stage for the first social hierarchies. So, in a way, the Neolithic Revolution was the original influencer economy, where owning a bigger farm meant more clout. And let's not forget the little detail of population growth. With a more dependable food supply, human populations started to boom. This was the ancient version of the baby boom, where the bountiful harvests of wheat and barley fed growing families and expanding communities. More food meant more mouths to feed, and more mouths meant more hands to work the fields. It was a virtuous cycle, or a vicious one, depending on your perspective, of growth and expansion. Yet not everything was sunshine and wheat fields. Settling down came with its own set of problems. For starters, staying in one place meant you had to deal with neighbors, and not everyone was keen on sharing. Land disputes probably date back to the first two farmers who realized their crops were encroaching on each other's territory. Plus, with permanent settlements came the need for governance. Someone had to keep the peace, settle disputes, and organize irrigation systems. Enter the early leaders, who were part farmer, part diplomat, part weather forecaster, and probably part therapist for dealing with all those neighborly squabbles. Mesopotamia, with its fertile crescent, was a prime example of how these dynamics played out. The region's unpredictable flooding was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it enriched the soil, creating ideal conditions for agriculture. On the other, it could wash away entire crops if the timing was off, leaving communities in dire straits. This unpredictability required ingenuity and collaboration, leading to the development of irrigation systems and the first instances of organized labor. Talk about teamwork making the dream work. As humans settled and populations grew, so did the complexity of their societies. With agriculture came surplus, and with surplus came trade. Suddenly, someone's extra barley could be exchanged for another's pottery, laying the groundwork for commerce. This was the dawn of economic systems, where bartering led to the concept of value, and eventually, dare we say it, money. It's like the world was playing an early version of Monopoly, where the goal was to accumulate and exchange resources rather than just passing go. The Neolithic Revolution wasn't just a simple shift in lifestyle. It was a seismic change in how humans interacted with the world and each other. It set in motion the wheels of civilization, leading to developments in technology, governance, and culture. But it wasn't a fairy tale of progress and prosperity. The harsh reality was that settling down came with its own challenges and conflicts, as humans had to navigate the complexities of life in larger, more organized groups. So, while it's tempting to romanticize this era as a peaceful pastoral idyll, the truth is far more nuanced. The Neolithic Revolution was a time of experimentation, adaptation, and sometimes sheer survival. It was a period when humans made a conscious choice to shape their environment rather than simply adapt to it. And in doing so, they laid the foundation for everything that followed, from the rise of cities to the creation of empires. The shift from hunting squirrels to farming wheat may seem like a small step, but it was a giant leap for humankind, setting the stage for the complex tapestry of civilization that we know today. Now, as our Neolithic ancestors settled into their newfound agrarian lifestyles, it wasn't long before they realized that having a well-stocked granary was just one part of the equation. You see, with great crops comes great responsibility, or at least the need to organize a bit better than a mammoth hunt. Enter the city-state, the ancient world's answer to a booming population and an economy that was rapidly outgrowing its village infancy. These early urban centers were the rock stars of their day, dazzling the Mesopotamian stage with innovation and a touch of chaos. Let's talk about Sumer, the poster child of early city-states. Nestled in the southern reaches of Mesopotamia around 4,500 BCE, Sumerian city-states like Uruk, and Eridu were the OG urban jungles. Picture bustling streets, minus the traffic lights, where trade and commerce hummed like a beehive. But unlike the democratic ideals of a Sunday farmer's market, these places were governed by rulers who had more in common with benevolent dictators than elected officials. Power, it seemed, was as attractive then as it is now. Only back then, it came with a ceremonial beard and a penchant for constructing monumental architecture. Case in point, the ziggurat. These step pyramid structures were the ancient equivalent of "look how much I can bench." While today we might express our ambitions with steel skyscrapers, the Sumerians reached for the heavens with mud, brick, and manpower. The great ziggurat of Ur, for example, was a towering testament to both religious fervor and the political might of the ruling priest-kings. Standing over 100 feet tall, it wasn't just a place to worship the god Nana. It was a statement, like ancient neon lights screaming, "We mean business." Not to mention, it provided a great vantage point for sparring invading neighbors. Now, governing a city-state wasn't all about building impressive real estate. It also involved a lot of paperwork. Well, clay work, to be exact. The Sumerians, ever the innovators, gave the world its first writing system, cuneiform. These wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets were the original Excel spreadsheets. Imagine trying to keep track of who owed what, and to whom, without writing it down. A nightmare, right? That's why the Sumerians pioneered this early form of writing around 3200 BCE. It wasn't about poetry or romance at first. It was the ancient art of keeping receipts. Grain transactions, tax records, legal matters. If it wasn't etched in clay, it didn't happen. Speaking of taxes and laws, let's not forget Hammurabi, a name that would send shivers down the spine of anyone with a guilty conscience. Jumping forward a bit to around 1754 BCE, Hammurabi was the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty, and he was a man with a plan. His piece de resistance was the Code of Hammurabi, a comprehensive set of laws that would make any modern-day lawyer quiver with envy. Carved into a 7-foot basalt steel, it contained 282 laws covering everything from property rights to criminal justice. Believe it or not, Hammurabi's code was less about justice being blind and more about it having a keen eye on property lines. The laws were explicit and often harsh, reflecting a society where maintaining order was a full-time job. Take law number 196, for example, the infamous eye for an eye. It's the biblical-sounding principle that says, if you poke someone's eye out, you can expect yours to be poked out in return. It's a justice system that didn't mince words or actions. And while it sounds a bit draconian, for its time, it was a logical way to maintain order in a world where personal vendettas could easily escalate. But let's not kid ourselves. Hammurabi's code wasn't all about fairness and equality. It was also a tool for asserting control and consolidating power. Just as today's laws often reflect the priorities of those in power, so too did Hammurabi's. His laws were laser-focused on protecting property, an obsession perhaps rivaled only by modern real estate moguls. Whether it was ensuring that landowners received compensation for damaged property or that merchants weren't swindled, it was clear that property was king. This brings us back to the broader picture of why these developments mattered. The emergence of city-states like those in Sumer wasn't just about impressive architecture or the birth of bureaucracy. It was about laying down the infrastructure for civilization as we know it. These early cities were laboratories of human organization, testing grounds for governance, trade, and social structure. They were places where human beings began to deal with the complexities of living together in large numbers, each with their own ambitions, grievances, and dreams. While it's tempting to romanticize these early city-states as idyllic cradles of civilization, the reality was more complex. They were also hotbeds of inequality, conflict, and power struggles. The rulers, often seen as divine or semi-divine, wielded their power with a mix of charisma and coercion. Their legacies, etched in stone and clay, remind us that the quest for order and control can often overshadow the quest for fairness. So, as we marvel at the accomplishments of these ancient societies, it's important to remember that, beneath the grandeur of ziggurats and the sophistication of cuneiform, there lay a society grappling with the same fundamental issues we face today. How to live together, how to govern fairly, and how to balance individual ambition with collective good. And while the tools and technologies have changed, the challenges remain surprisingly familiar. As we continue this journey through the annals of history, let's keep in mind that the story of civilization is as much about its triumphs as it is about its trials. Stay tuned, because the plot is about to thicken. Now that we've navigated the bustling bazaars of Mesopotamia, let's set our sights on the sand-swept splendor of ancient Egypt, where pharaohs ruled with more panache than a rock star at a sold-out arena. Imagine a landscape where the Nile was the lifeblood, not just a river, but a metaphorical golden ticket to prosperity. Egypt was the Vegas of the ancient world, and its pharaohs were the headliners. But unlike your modern-day celebrity shenanigans, they didn't just flaunt their wealth with designer labels. They built pyramids, the ultimate architectural mic drop. The pyramids weren't just colossal tombs. They were the ancient equivalent of a billionaire's skyscraper, standing as testaments to both divine right and economic might. The Great Pyramid of Giza, completed around 2560 BCE, is a marvel that would make any modern engineer double-check their blueprints. Initially standing at a whopping 481 feet, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 800 years. Take that, Burj Khalifa. But how did they pull off such a Herculean feat without cranes, bulldozers, or even a decent cup of coffee to fuel the workforce? Spoiler alert, it wasn't alien technology or Atlantean magic, just good old-fashioned human ingenuity and, well, a whole lot of manpower. Let's talk about the social hierarchy that made this architectural grandeur possible. Picture a pyramid scheme, pun totally intended, where at the apex sits the pharaoh, a living god on earth. Below him, the high priests and nobles, who ensured both the pharaoh and the guards were kept happy with a steady supply of rituals and offerings. The pharaoh's word was law, and his whims were as unquestionable as gravity. Beneath this divine aristocracy were the scribes and officials, the ancient bureaucrats who kept the wheels of the state greased with papyrus and ink. But the real unsung heroes of pyramid building were the laborers, thousands of them, who toiled day and night under the blistering sun. Forget the Hollywood image of slaves whipped into submission. Recent evidence suggests these workers were a well-fed, organized workforce, essentially Egypt's earliest union members. They were paid not with coins, but with bread and beer. Yes, beer. Imagine a payroll where your weekly wages came in the form of loaves and suds. In a world without refrigeration or pasteurization, beer wasn't just a beverage. It was a staple, safer to drink than the Nile's often dubious water. Now, let's dive into the economics of pyramid building. Estimations suggest that constructing the Great Pyramid required about 3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 5 and 15 tons. Moving these behemoths involved a workforce of roughly 20,000 to 30,000 people at any one time, rotating in and out over a period of 20 years. It was an operation as grand as the structures themselves, supported by a meticulously planned supply chain that would make modern logistics companies blush. You might wonder, was it worth it? From an economic standpoint, the resources poured into building pyramids were astronomical. Yet these monuments were more than just tombs. They were investments in eternal glory, cementing the pharaoh's legacy in limestone and legend. It was a gamble on immortality, a bid to ensure that long after the pharaoh had shuffled off this mortal coil, his name would reverberate through the echoes of history. But let's temper the romanticism with a healthy dose of reality. The pyramids were not built solely out of divine devotion or national pride. They were also political tools, designed to display the pharaoh's power and divine favor. Their construction provided jobs, stimulated the economy, and reinforced the social order. In a way, they were the ultimate public works project, albeit one with a very private end goal, ensuring the pharaoh's smooth passage into the afterlife. Speaking of the afterlife, let's not forget the mummy in the room, mummification. The process, wrapped in more mystery than a Hollywood blockbuster, was less about spooky curses and more about practical preservation. The Egyptians believed the body was essential for the afterlife, and preserving it was akin to saving your favorite playlist for eternity. Mummification was a meticulous process, involving the removal of internal organs, dehydration of the body with natron, a naturally occurring salt, and finally, wrapping the body in linen. This wasn't just for pharaohs. Anyone with enough wealth could buy a ticket to eternity. But let's debunk the myth that every mummy was swaddled in gold leaf. For the average Joe, or rather, the average Kemet, the afterlife preparations were somewhat less luxurious. The grandiose sarcophagi and elaborate tombs were reserved for the elites, while commoners often had to settle for more modest accommodations. The The romance of mummification glosses over the harsh economic realities. Preserving one's body for the afterlife was as much a display of wealth as it was of piety. Now, while we've been gazing up at the pyramids and contemplating the afterlife, life for the average Egyptian worker was a bit less glamorous. They lived in bustling workers' villages, like the one at Deir el-Medina, where they had modest homes and a community life that surprisingly wasn't all work and no play. Archaeological findings reveal they had access to medical care, took part in religious festivals, and even went on strike when their wages, bread and beer, weren't delivered on time. Talk about an ancient labor movement. These workers, with their calloused hands and sunburned brows, were the backbone of Egypt's monumental achievements. While the pharaohs got the credit, it was the laborers' sweat and determination that turned grand visions into granite realities. They didn't just build pyramids, they built a legacy that would withstand the sands of time, whispering tales of human endeavor to anyone willing to listen. As we wrap up this leg of our journey through ancient Egypt, it's clear that the reality behind the romance is just as compelling. The pyramids, those monolithic embodiments of human ambition, are more than just relics of the past. They're a testament to what people can achieve when driven by a mix of faith, economics, and a little bit of audacity. Yet they also remind us of the human cost behind such grandeur, the lives spent, the labor given, all in pursuit of a legacy that would outlast even the harshest desert winds. Stay tuned, because the saga continues, and there's plenty more to uncover in the shifting sands of history. Next up, we'll delve into the intrigue of Egyptian politics and the real power players behind the throne. Until then, keep your eyes on the horizon. There's always more to see in the ever-unfolding tapestry of the past. As we leave behind the regal complexities of Egyptian politics, let's set our sights eastward on a civilization that was quietly redefining urban living before most others had figured out the basics of plumbing. Welcome to the Indus Valley, circa 2500 BCE, where the cities were planned with more foresight than your average modern-day suburb. While the rest of the ancient world was still figuring out how not to trip over their own streets, the folks in the Indus Valley were laying down a blueprint for urban planning that would make city engineers weep with envy. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro were the crown jewels of this civilization, sprawling metropolises that boasted an impressive population of about 40,000 people each. These cities were laid out on a precise grid system, with streets intersecting at right angles, a feature that would have made Roman architects nod in approval centuries later. But the real showstopper, their sewage system. While other civilizations were still dumping waste into the nearest river, the Indus Valley had intricate underground drainage systems made of baked clay pipes. That's right, clay pipes for sewage, folks. They were dealing with waste management long before it became a municipal nightmare. It's baffling to think that we know more about the Indus Valley's plumbing than their politics. Their script, a collection of over 400 symbols, remains undeciphered to this day. It's the ancient equivalent of a larked diary, taunting us with secrets of governance, culture, and daily life that we can only speculate about. Imagine having a treasure trove of information right in front of you, but lacking the Rosetta Stone to crack it open. It's like finding an ancient iPhone without the password. Frustrating, to say the least. So, we might not know what their rulers were up to, but we can infer a lot from what they left behind. The absence of grand temples or palaces suggests a society that might have prioritized communal well-being over individual glory. It's a fascinating contrast to the monumental ego projects seen in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Instead of ziggurats or pyramids, they invested their resources into efficient city layouts and public baths, the latter being a precursor to our modern obsession with hygiene. Maybe it was less about divine rulers and more about divine cleanliness. Speaking of communal well-being, the economy of the Indus Valley was as vibrant as its cities. It wasn't just the local exchange of goods. They had established trade links stretching all the way to Mesopotamia, over 500 kilometers away. This was no small feat, considering the logistics of overland trade routes and the lack of modern transportation. They exported goods like cotton, beads, and ceramics, receiving silver, tin, and wool in return. The Indus merchants were the original global traders, navigating a complex web of commerce that spanned continents. However, the Indus Valley's economic prowess wasn't immune to the capricious whims of Mother Nature. Climate change, that modern-day bogeyman, was already wreaking havoc back then. Around 1900 BCE, the once mighty monsoon patterns became erratic, leading to prolonged droughts. Rivers that had been lifelines for agriculture and trade began to dry up, and settlements that had thrived on the banks of these waterways were left high and dry, literally. The once thriving cities began to depopulate, and the civilization that had pioneered urban planning faced an uncertain future. As the monsoons faded and agricultural productivity waned, the societal structure started to unravel. The disappearance of the Indus Valley civilization is one of history's great unsolved mysteries. Was it solely climate change that drove them to abandon their cities? Or were there other factors at play, like internal strife or invasions? The truth is, we don't know for sure. The romantic allure of a lost civilization lies in its enigma, the endless possibilities of what might have been. While we can only speculate about the political machinations and social dynamics, the legacy of the Indus Valley is clear. They were architects of urban sophistication, masters of trade, and early victims of environmental change. Their story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, it is still at the mercy of the natural world. The romance of their achievements is tempered by the harsh reality of their decline, a narrative as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. As we traverse the landscape of ancient history, the Indus Valley stands as a testament to the ingenuity and fragility of human civilization. Their cities may be in ruins, but their innovations continue to echo through time, challenging our understanding of what it means to be truly advanced. They remind us that progress is not just about grand monuments or deciphered scripts, but about how we choose to live together, manage our resources, and adapt to the challenges that come our way. So, there you have it, a civilization that was as much about communal order as it was about individual mystery. As we move on to the next chapter of our journey, keep in mind that the sands of history are filled with stories yet to be uncovered, each one offering new lessons and insights. In the grand tapestry of the past, the Indus Valley is a vibrant thread, woven into the fabric of our shared human experience. Stay tuned, because there's always more to discover in the ever-unfolding saga of history. The Indus Valley may have left us with more questions than answers, but it wasn't the only civilization to face the unforgiving tides of history. As we pivot from the drainage ditches of Mohenjo-Daro, let's jump into the Bronze Age, a period that unfolded from roughly 3,300 to 1,200 BCE, when civilizations across the known world were connected by trade networks as intricate as a Byzantine tapestry. Imagine a time when tin from what's now Afghanistan and copper from Cyprus were the lifeblood of economies, keeping the wheels of commerce turning and the forges blazing. It was the original global supply chain, a pre-digital World Wide Web that linked disparate cultures through the medium of metal. The Bronze Age was the backdrop for some of humanity's most dazzling civilizational flourishes. We're talking about the Minoans on Crete with their labyrinthine palaces, the Mycenaeans in Greece with their tales of epic battles, and of course, the Hittites in Anatolia, who could give any Game of Thrones saga a run for its money. Each of these societies was a powerhouse of trade and innovation, thriving on the exchange of goods, ideas, and occasionally hostilities, and the secret source to their success: bronze, a sturdy alloy of copper and tin that revolutionized warfare, agriculture, and even art. But just as these civilizations were humming along nicely, the Bronze Age collapse swooped in around 1200 BCE, like a historical wrecking ball. Picture this: thriving cities suddenly abandoned, trade routes severed, and a period of darkness descending over the Mediterranean. The reasons for this dramatic downturn remain as murky as a politician's tax returns, but scholars suggest a confluence of calamities. Climate change, natural disasters, economic instability, and marauding sea peoples all played their part in unraveling the web of connections that had bound the region together. Let's zoom in on the sea peoples for a moment, those enigmatic invaders whose identity remains a topic of fierce academic debate. Some suggest they were displaced groups from the Aegean, others propose they were pirates gone wild. Regardless of their origins, their impact was undeniable. They left a trail of destruction from the Levant to Egypt, disrupting trade and destabilizing societies that had grown fat on interdependence. It was as if someone pulled the plug on the Mediterranean bath, leaving once mighty empires floundering in the shallow end. The collapse wasn't uniform. It unfolded like a slow-motion car crash, with different regions experiencing varying degrees of chaos. Take the Hittites, for instance. Their empire, which had once rivaled Egypt's in power, crumbled under the weight of internal strife and external pressures. Their capital, Hadusa, was abandoned, its grand palaces and fortifications left to the whims of nature. Meanwhile, the Mycenaeans faced a similar fate. Their citadels, once bustling hubs of administration and culture, became ghost towns, their linear-based script fading into obscurity like a forgotten language app. Ironically, while the fall of these civilizations signaled the end of the Bronze Age, it also marked the dawn of the Iron Age. As societies grappled with their newfound vulnerabilities, they turned to innovation to pull themselves out of the mire. The unstable supply of tin, essential for making bronze, led cultures to explore the uses of iron, which, if not as glamorous, was more abundant and eventually more practical for warfare and tools. This shift was like swapping out a high-performance sports car for a reliable pickup truck, less flashy perhaps, but essential for rebuilding and resilience. The tales of the Bronze Age collapse are as much about human adaptability as they are about downfall. They remind us that civilizations are not static monoliths, but living organisms that must evolve or face extinction. The collapse teaches us about the fragility of interconnected systems, where a disruption in one area can send ripples across continents. It's a lesson that resonates today in our world of global trade and digital economies, where a container ship stuck in a canal can trigger a cascade of logistical nightmares. As we sift through the ruins of these ancient civilizations, we're left with a bittersweet understanding of progress and peril. The romantic allure of lost empires, with their grand architecture and artistic feats, is tempered by the harsh realities of their decline. These stories underscore the importance of innovation, not just in times of prosperity, but as a lifeline in periods of crisis. They highlight the critical balance between exploiting resources and ensuring sustainability, a balance that, when tipped, can lead to catastrophe. In wrapping up our journey through the ancient world, we're reminded that history is a complex tapestry woven from threads of triumph and tragedy. It's a reminder that while societies may rise and fall, the human spirit's drive to innovate and adapt remains a constant. These ancient tales hold a mirror to our modern world, offering valuable insights into sustainability, resilience, and the enduring power of human ingenuity. So, as you drift off to sleep, let these stories of ancient resilience and creativity inspire you to face the challenges of today with a spirit as unyielding as the civilizations that once thrived in the Bronze Age. The ancient Egyptians had a thing for sleep that makes modern insomniacs look like amateurs. For them, catching some ZS was an art form, a spiritual journey, and a cosmic hotline to the gods, all rolled into one. Picture this: a civilization so obsessed with dreaming that they turned their bedrooms into divine chambers, each bed crafted with the precision of a Swiss watch and the grandeur of a Hollywood blockbuster set. Forget memory foam. These folks were sleeping on beds made from ebony, gold, and exotic woods that would have made Marie Antoinette green with envy. Cleopatra probably felt like she was sleeping in the lap of luxury, quite literally. Now, these aren't just any beds. We're talking about the kind of sleep setup that could make a Sleep Number bed look like a bargain basement inflatable mattress. The pharaohs and the elite were connoisseurs of comfort, with beds elevated off the ground to avoid the creepy crawlies of the desert floor. If you were a bigwig in ancient Egypt, your bed was not complete without a headrest, an elegantly carved, crescent-shaped contraption designed to cradle your noggin just so. And why all the fuss? Because in the land of the Nile, dreams were considered divine messages, and you needed the right gear to tune into the celestial frequencies. The Egyptians didn't just sleep. They prepared for a nightly journey into another world. They had rituals more elaborate than a modern bedtime routine with essential oils and meditation apps. Take, for instance, the Temple of Serapis in Saqqara. Pilgrims would travel hundreds of miles, seeking a good night's sleep in the hopes of receiving a divine dream. They'd spend the night on sacred grounds, waiting for the gods to drop some wisdom, which is a bit like hoping your horoscope will tell you what stocks to invest in. These dream temples were essentially the world's first sleep clinics, where priests doubled as early sleep consultants. Forget Ambien. These guys offered spiritual prescriptions. The high priest would decipher your dream like an ancient Freud, but instead of attributing everything to your mother, the gods were usually to blame or to thank. A chat with the priests might go something like this. Ah, you dreamed of a crocodile in a toga. Clearly, Sobek, the crocodile god, wants you to build a canal. Get to it. The Egyptians' dream interpretation wasn't just mystical mumbo-jumbo. It was woven into the very fabric of their society, influencing decisions from mundane daily tasks to high-stakes political maneuvers. Ramses Roman II, the rock star of Pharaohs, is rumored to have dreamt of the sun god Ra giving him the thumbs up before a major battle. Talk about a morale booster. It's like getting a pep talk from your favorite celebrity before a big presentation. Here's the kicker, though. The obsession with dreams wasn't purely spiritual. It had an economic angle, too. The temples raked in offerings from those desperate for a divine word, turning dreams into a lucrative enterprise. The priests were essentially running a celestial heartline, complete with premium rates, who knew that interpreting a dream about a talking hippo could be so financially rewarding. And let's not forget the common folk, who also had their share of dream escapades. While they couldn't afford the swanky temple stays, they had their own sleep rituals. Ordinary Egyptians would place amulets under their pillows, hoping for protection from evil spirits and a good dream or two. It was a DIY approach to divine communication, the ancient equivalent of a homemade dream catcher. In the end, the Egyptians' approach to sleep was a fascinating blend of practicality and mysticism. They elevated the act of sleeping to a divine experience, built beds that were as much about status as comfort, and turned dreams into a booming business. Next time you lie awake counting sheep, just remember, the Egyptians might have been counting ibis instead, all while hoping for a godly nudge in the right direction. Meanwhile, over in Greece, the art of napping wasn't just a pastime. It was elevated to a philosophical pursuit. While the Egyptians were busy with their celestial heartline, the Greeks were mastering the fine art of the siesta. Yes, the land of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle also had a profound appreciation for catching some midday ZS. And why not? Sleep was seen as a divine gift from the gods, a sacred pause in the chaos of life. Enter Hypnos, the god of sleep, who was as beloved in Greek mythology as a well-timed power nap is in today's corporate world. Now, Hypnos wasn't just some minor deity hanging out on Olympus. He was a big deal, living in a dark cave where the sun never shined, nestled between the realms of the living and the dead. He could send people into a deep slumber with the mere flick of his wrist. Imagine having that power in a board meeting. But Hypnos wasn't just about clerking out. He was a symbol of peace and tranquility in a world often fraught with conflict. And for the Greeks, who had a penchant for both war and wisdom, this was a welcome respite. Sleep for the Greeks wasn't just about recharging the body. It was a spiritual and intellectual exercise. The famed philosopher Aristotle mused over the nature of sleep and dreams, pondering whether they were merely physiological phenomena or divine messages. Sure, his theories might have been a bit off the mark by modern standards. He had a penchant for thinking sleep was a result of food digestion, a theory that might explain those post-feast comas. But the Greeks were onto something. They saw sleep as an essential component of a balanced life, not just an inconvenient pause between work and play. Public siestas were not just accepted, they were encouraged. In bustling cities like Athens, where the sun could be as relentless as a Spartan drill instructor, the midday nap was a communal affair. Shops would close, markets would quiet down, and even the most ambitious philosophers would take a break from solving the mysteries of the universe. This wasn't laziness, it was practicality wrapped in a toga. Think of it as the ancient version of work-life balance, long before Silicon Valley started installing nap pods in the office. But there was more to these naps than mere rest. They had socio-political implications, too. Public siestas were a great equalizer, a moment where distinctions between rich and poor, citizen and non-citizen, were momentarily blurred. Everyone needed rest, from the lowliest parter to the most esteemed statesman. And in a society obsessed with democracy and civic duty, this shared experience was a subtle reminder of their common humanity. It's like the ancient Greeks were saying, hey, even Pericles needs a nap sometimes. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, or in this case, shade and sleep. The reality was that not everyone got to enjoy these idyllic midday breaks. Slaves, who formed a significant part of Greek society, had no such luxuries. They toiled away while their masters pondered the nature of dreams or snoozed under olive trees. This stark social divide was as much a part of the landscape as the Parthenon, a reminder that even in the land of democracy, not all were equal when it came to the perks of life. But let's get back to the dreamers, those philosophers who turned sleep into an art form. Take the Stoics, for instance. These folks saw sleep as a training ground for the soul. They believed that mastering the art of sleeping well was just as important as mastering the art of living well. And they weren't alone. The Epicureans, those hedonists of antiquity, viewed sleep as one of life's simple pleasures, a natural and necessary joy. In a world where indulgence was often condemned, sleep was one indulgence they could all agree upon. So, while the Greeks may have been known for their epic battles and towering achievements, they also understood the power of a good nap. They knew that in the grand theatre of life, sometimes the most profound revelations came not in the heat of debate, but in the quiet of slumber. As much as they loved their oratory and rhetoric, they also valued the silent wisdom that only a restful mind could attain. In the end, the Greeks elevated sleep to a philosophical and societal cornerstone, much like they did with everything else they touched. They understood that while dreams might not always be prophetic, the act of sleeping itself was a divine gift worth cherishing. So, the next time you find yourself sneaking in a nap, remember you're in good company. After all, if it was good enough for the Greeks, it's probably good enough for the rest of us. Meanwhile, as the Greeks were mastering the art of the nap, the Romans were busy turning sleep into something of an imperial power play. In ancient Rome, sleep wasn't just a time to recharge the batteries. It was a statement. You see, the Romans had a knack for turning everyday activities into grandiose displays of status and influence, and bedtime was no exception. Imagine a world where your bedroom wasn't just a place to crash, but a stage upon which social dramas unfolded, and where the width of your mattress was practically a measure of your clout. Now, let's talk about those Roman bedrooms. These weren't your average bedchambers. They were more like the Ritz-Carlton of the ancient world. The elite Romans had a penchant for luxury that makes modern interior designers look like amateurs. We're talking about lavish sleeping quarters, adorned with silk sheets, plush cushions, and enough precious metals to make a pirate weep with envy. Indeed, the aristocrats' sleeping arrangements were as much about flaunting wealth as they were about comfort. After all, what better way to assert your dominance than to slumber on a bed that costs more than some folks' entire estates? But here's the kicker. While everyone assumes the Romans were running on endless energy, burning the midnight oil like a tech startup during a product launch, that's not quite the case. The myth of the Roman all-nighter is one that needs serious debunking. Contrary to popular belief, many Romans, especially the elite, valued their beauty sleep. In fact, they were big on the idea of the siesta, taking cues from their Mediterranean neighbors. You see, the Roman day was divided into watches, and the third watch was a prime time for a little shut-eye. So, while they were busy conquering the known world, they were also ensuring they got their 40 winks. And let's not forget the political angle. In Rome, sleep schedules were not just personal preferences, they were strategic tools. The Roman Senate, for instance, often convened at dawn. This wasn't because they were all morning people, far from it. The early start was a tactical move, giving the upper hand to those who were disciplined enough to rise with the sun. It was a power play, ensuring that the well-rested had the first crack at decision-making, leaving the late risers to scramble for influence. Moreover, in the realm of Roman politics, sleep could be a weapon. Imagine a senator known for his late-night antics and early morning meetings. His opponents, weary from lack of sleep, often found themselves outmaneuvered, both politically and socially. It's like the ancient Roman version of being out-tweeted before you've had your morning coffee. Tiberius, one of Rome's more notorious emperors, was said to have taken full advantage of this. His erratic sleep schedule kept his court constantly on edge, unsure whether they'd be called to discuss matters of state or left to toss and turn in their beds. But let's delve deeper into the economic aspects. The Romans were nothing if not pragmatic, and their approach to sleep was no different. The wealthy could afford to lounge around on their gilded beds, But for the average Roman citizen, sleep was a commodity. Many Romans lived in cramped insulae apartment buildings, where noise and discomfort were constant companions. A good night's sleep was a luxury many couldn't afford, both literally and figuratively. This disparity was a stark reminder of the social divide, where the affluent lounged in their opulent villas, while the common folk contended with the urban cacophony. Yet, even amidst these inequalities, the Romans found ways to make sleep work for them. The concept of first sleep and second sleep was prevalent, where people would wake in the middle of the night, engage in various activities, and then return to bed. This segmented sleep pattern was as much a product of the environment as it was of habit. With the hustle and bustle of Roman life, grabbing a few hours here and there was often the best one could do. And let's not overlook the role of dreams in Roman society. Much like the Egyptians, Romans placed great stock in what the gods might be whispering into their ears as they slept. Dreams were considered portents and omens, and interpreting them was serious business. However, unlike the Egyptians' divine heartline, the Romans had their own brand of dream interpretation, often tied to the whims of their pantheon. A dream of Jupiter might mean an impending victory, while a nightmare featuring Mars could spell doom. But here's a reality check. While the elite had access to interpreters and oracles, the majority muddled through on their own, relying on personal intuition or folk wisdom. Dreams were democratic in their occurrence, but aristocratic in their interpretation. It's a bit like having access to tweets, but needing a PR team to spin them in your favor. In essence, the Romans turned the act of sleeping into a microcosm of their society, from the grandeur of their bedrooms to the strategic deployment of sleep in political machinations. They understood that even in rest, there was power to be harnessed. So, next time you're tempted to pull an all-nighter, remember that even the Romans knew when to call it a night. And as we continue this journey through the slumberous side of history, we'll uncover more about how the Romans balanced ambition with the need to hit the hay. As we leave the Romans to their imperial dreams and strategized siestas, let's venture into the misty realms of the Celts and their enigmatic druids. If you're imagining Celtic sleep rituals as a quaint affair with folks in woolen tunics, gently dozing off by a fireside, think again. These people were less about bedtime stories and more about making REM sleep a mystical experience. Welcome to the world where dreams weren't just personal subconscious adventures. They were cosmic communiques and spiritual odysseys. Now, the Celts had a knack for turning the mundane into the magical, and sleep was no exception. Their nocturnal rituals were not merely about catching some shut-eye. They were about connecting with the other world. Picture this, a druidic ceremony under a starry sky, where sleep wasn't just a biological necessity, but a sacred rite. The Druids, those mysterious keepers of Celtic wisdom, believed that in sleep, the soul could travel beyond the confines of the physical world to commune with deities and spirits. It's like astral projection meets a spiritual conference call. But before we dive into the dreamscapes, let's set the stage. The Druids weren't your average pastoral priests. These were the intellectual heavyweights of Celtic society, wielding knowledge like a warrior wields a sword. Their sleep ceremonies often involved elaborate rituals, complete with chants and incantations designed to guide the sleeper into a dream state ripe for divine messages. And forget about counting sheep. These guys were probably counting ancient Celtic deities. The Druids saw sleep as a portal to the other world, a realm as real to them as the rolling hills of Ireland or the dense forests of Gaul. In their view, dreams were not just random neural firings, but messages from the gods or the spirits of ancestors. Ever dream of a giant talking salmon? That wasn't just your mind playing tricks. It might be the salmon of knowledge trying to drop some wisdom on you. And while we might chuckle at the idea of a fish as a spiritual guide, the Celts took these experiences seriously, believing that the nocturnal visions could offer insights into everything from personal dilemmas to community crises. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was that these dream rituals often came with a side of hardship. The Druids would sometimes engage in what today we might call mindful sleep deprivation, fasting and staying awake for extended periods to induce visions. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of pulling an all-nighter fueled by spiritual expectations rather than caffeine. The goal, to reach a state where the lines between waking and dreaming blurred, opening a direct line to the divine. It's the kind of dedication that makes pulling an all-nighter for a college exam look like a nap. Yet, these rituals weren't just about personal enlightenment. They had a broader social function, too. Dream interpretation was a communal affair, and the insights gleaned were often used to guide decisions affecting the entire tribe. A well-interpreted dream could mean the difference between waging war or making peace. It's like having a mystical board of directors, where decisions were based on both earthly wisdom and otherworldly guidance. And here's where the economic angle comes in. The Druids, much like their Egyptian and Roman counterparts, knew how to monetize the mystical. Interpreting dreams wasn't just a spiritual service, it was a valuable skill. Druids were often rewarded handsomely for their insights, whether in livestock, labor, or goods. So, dream interpretation became a thriving enterprise, blending spirituality with a touch of shrewd economic sense. But let's not get carried away with the mysticism. The Druids, for all their spiritual prowess, were also pragmatic. They understood that sleep and dreams were part of the natural world, influenced by diet, environment, and even the weather. They prescribed herbal remedies to ensure a restful night, using plants like valerian and chamomile long before they became staples of the modern herbal tea aisle. These remedies were based on empirical observations, proving that even in a world of myths, science had its place. Yet, the allure of druidic dream rituals wasn't without its skeptics. As with any society, there were undoubtedly those who rolled their eyes at the idea of receiving life-changing advice from a particularly vivid dream. It's a bit like today's cynics questioning the wisdom of basing major life choices on a shaky horoscope. In essence, the Celts and their druids turned sleep into a sacred art form, blending the mystical with the practical. They understood that while dreams could offer glimpses into the divine, they were also reflections of the dreamer's own life and circumstances. It's a reminder that even in a world steeped in myth and magic, the search for meaning was as much about self-reflection as it was about spiritual revelation. So, as we explore the sleep rituals of the Celts, remember that even in the most mystical of practices, there's a thread of pragmatism and economic savvy. And while we might not take our dreams as seriously as the Druids did, there's something to be said about embracing the mystery of sleep and the potential insights it can offer. After all, whether you're dreaming of ancient deities or just trying to make sense of your day, the journey through sleep is a universal experience that connects us to the past in ways both profound and surprisingly practical. All right, we've danced through sleep rituals from the Egyptians' divine dream chambers to the Greeks' philosophical siestas, not forgetting the Romans' strategic snoozes and the Druids' mystical slumbers. But as much as these ancient societies seemed like they had it all figured out, let's be honest, the quest for a good night's sleep was as elusive then as it is now. Fast forward to today, and we're still wrestling with sleep like an insomniac gladiator trying to vanquish a particularly stubborn sheep. Despite all our scientific advancements and sleep tech gadgets, the National Sleep Foundation tells us that about 30% of Americans have insomnia at some point in their lives. That's nearly 100 million people lying awake, wondering if they should start counting eyebises or consult the salmon of knowledge. Now, insomnia isn't just a modern malaise. Take ancient Rome, for instance, where chronic sleeplessness was as common as toga malfunctions. Roman philosopher Seneca, who probably needed a nap himself, once said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." A bit harsh, maybe, but it shows that even back then, people were grappling with time management and sleep hygiene. You could say the Romans invented the first sleep study, minus the fancy lab and white coats. Let's not forget the economic angle here. Today, the global sleep industry is worth $432 billion and counting. Back then, while the Egyptians and Druids weren't exactly selling weighted blankets, they were definitely monetizing the sleep game. Temples and Druids, with their celestial consultations, were the original sleep consultants, charging for dream interpretations and spiritual guidance. It's a bit like modern sleep coaches and meditation apps, but with more incense and fewer push notifications. And speaking of modern solutions, the Greeks would probably roll their eyes at our energy drinks and all-night Netflix binges. They'd argue that the real secret to good sleep is balance, not bulldozing through a to-do list until midnight. They understood that sometimes the best ideas come after a good nap under an olive tree, not from staring bleary-eyed at a spreadsheet. Aristotle might have been a bit off with his digestion theories, but he was right to emphasize balance, something we could all use a little more of today. But what about our sleep environments? The Egyptians had their ebony and gold beds, while we have memory foam and smart mattresses. Yet, isn't it fascinating that despite all this innovation, we're still chasing the same elusive dream of the perfect night's sleep? Imagine telling Cleopatra about a smart bed that tracks your REM cycles. She'd probably laugh and offer you a headrest carved from ivory, insisting that divine dreams don't need microchips. What's truly timeless is our obsession with dreams. The Celts, with their dream rituals, would find kindred spirits in modern psychologists who analyze dreams to unlock the subconscious. Sure, today's dream dictionaries might lack the drama of druidic ceremonies, but the fascination remains. We still wonder if that dream about being chased by a giant zucchini means we should change jobs or simply cut back on late-night snacks. Now, it's easy to romanticize these ancient sleep practices, but let's not forget that most people were just trying to get by. For every pharaoh with a plush bed, there were thousands of workers sleeping on straw mats. The average Roman might have been more concerned with a roof over their head than the width of their mattress. It's a reminder that while history is full of grand tales, the day-to-day realities were often less glamorous. Yet, the underlying truth is that the quest for a good night's sleep has always been a constant. Whether it's through celestial rituals or modern sleep apps, humans have always sought ways to bridge the gap between wakefulness and rest. It's a testament to our enduring desire for peace of mind and a reminder that sometimes the simplest things, like a good night's sleep, are the hardest to achieve. In the end, whether we're consulting dream dictionaries or counting sheep, our pursuit of rest and rejuvenation is as ancient as civilization itself. So next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., remember, you're part of a long line of insomniacs, from pharaohs to philosophers, all searching for the same thing, a little peace in a restless world. And who knows, maybe in the grand tapestry of history, we'll find that the answer was in our dreams all along.